Chapter 10:26. Dean glanced at him but didn't say anything. He sat in the study room and looked through the information. He found that the Black Mage had a wide range of knowledge, especially in the field of biological research and the creation of poisons. Neurotoxin, bloodlust, Burgenmosis disease. Dean looked through the drug experiment. Some of them were poisons developed by the Black Mage, and some were famous poisons developed by other people in the same field. He read 10 lines at a glance. His super memory allowed him to have a photographic memory. Suddenly, he turned to a book with the words, "Witch Blood Technique." It was more like a diary than a book. The handwriting of the Black Mage was recording about the witch blood technique. This was a kind of neurotoxin that could be inherited. Once infected, the offspring would inherit it. After being infected by the witch blood technique, the personality would become bloodthirsty, violent, impulsive, and extremely emotional. Sometimes they would be irritable, and sometimes they would be depressed. According to the records, some of the people who were infected by the witch blood technique became emotional and killed people in the street. They were arrested. Some of them were desperate and committed suicide. Dean looked at the records of the cases. The names were shocking. When he turned to the last page, he saw the name of Berit Born. Behind this name, there was a string of surname Born. "Did you use the witch blood technique on Berit?" Dean's face slightly changed as he looked at the old man. The Black Mage knew that the matter would be exposed when Dean turned to the witch blood technique. He smiled bitterly. "I was forced to do it. You know, wizards like us need a lot of money to research things. When I went to Berit's place, I wanted to use my ability to exchange for the corresponding remuneration. But he relied on his aristocratic status and often defaulted on my salary. In the end, I had no choice but to rely on myself." Dean slightly sneered, but didn't expose him. From the fragmentary words of the transformed woman in the underground laboratory, he knew that the old man was lying. Although Berit was an aristocratic earl, but the Black Mage was also a master. He was a big shot in the castle. Berit was stupid enough to default the salary of such a master. From the beginning, he targeted the Born family with a purpose. However, this had nothing to do with him. He suddenly thought of the young master named Leo he had seen when he first arrived, and the young master who had sneaked into his husband's concubine's room at night, as well as the second young mistress who liked to play sick games. Obviously, these people had been affected by the witch blood spell that the Black Magician had cast on their families. Their desires had broken free from the shackles and were uncontrollable. In the end, it would only bring about destruction, a destruction that would cause them to have no descendants. "What a vicious poison," Dean whispered. The Black Wizard smiled bitterly. "I'm just trying to protect myself. I like it." Dean smiled and looked at him. "Why don't you put such a good thing in the giant wall? Do you need to worry about being arrested by the temple?" The Black Wizard was stunned. He suspected that he had heard wrongly. He said in a daze, "Isn't this too dangerous? Are you afraid of danger?" The Black Mage saw Dean's serious eyes, and suddenly his heart throbbed. He felt that Dean's idea was not to test him, but such an idea was too crazy, and he had never thought of it. He suddenly felt that he was a bit stupid. Yes, why didn't he put this thing in the whole city? There was a burst of excitement in his heart, but soon this excitement was quickly extinguished. He thought of a great existence. "What's wrong?" Dean noticed the change in his face and slightly narrowed his eyes. The Black Wizard shook his head. "If I put it in a large area, it will inevitably cause the temple to search for me. If it's only the temple, it's fine. But if the movement is too big, it will definitely attract the attention of the Wizard King. Once he takes action, my whereabouts will soon be exposed. In the past, there was a wizard who broke the rules and started a massacre in many small towns. Later, before the law enforcers of the temple arrived, that person was arrested by the Wizard King and sentenced to death in the underground Shuraba." "Wizard King?" Dean raised his eyebrows. "Is he more powerful than the 8 lords?" Even so, he can't resist your witch blood spell, right? The Black Wizard smiled bitterly. The most terrible thing about the Wizard King is not his strength, but his omniscient and omnipotent witchcraft. Although my witch blood spell is magical, in his hands, it will definitely be broken. You have so much confidence in him. It can't be helped. He has the 3 great artifacts that all sorcerers dream of. All sorcerers will be defeated in front of these 3 great artifacts. The Sorcerer King is invincible with these 3 great artifacts in his hands. Dean was a little surprised. He said with interest, "What 3 artifacts? Tell me about them." These 3 artifacts are God's eyes, Sun God's mirror, and the Pearl of the Dead. The Dark Wizard's eyes flickered with emotion and envy. The Eye of Gods can destroy all magi and see through all illusions. It can see through the microscopic mirror and solve all problems from the root. Sun God's mirror is even more powerful. It can emit magical rays, and according to legend, it can create light. As for the Pearl of the Dead, it is said that the voice of the dead can be heard from it, and the soul can be easily taken away. It is the only one among the 3 artifacts that has a very strong fighting ability. Even the Wall Lord is afraid of the Pearl of the Dead. This is the reason why the temple doesn't dare to exterminate us. Therefore, we can offend the temple and the Wall Lord, but we absolutely can't offend the Wizard King. Otherwise, no one can protect you. The Black Wizard was observing Dean's expression as he spoke. He was even more surprised to see that Dean was listening seriously. He just wanted to test him, but he didn't expect to find out that Dean was obviously not a wizard. However, it was obvious that it wasn't the first time that Dean had used the microscopic mirror. Was he from the Magic Research Institute? Did he betray the Magic Research Institute? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was a possibility. Dean didn't know that the Black Magician was immersed in the joy of catching his weakness. He was shocked by the 3 artifacts that the Black Magician had mentioned, especially the Orb of the Dead. If it was just to hear the voice of the dead, he wouldn't care. He would even disdain it. Any phonograph would be able to do that. However, to be able to capture the soul, it was not within the scope of a phonograph. It seems that these 3 things should be very high-end instruments from the old era. I don't know what the prototype is. Dean's eyes flashed. His heart was boiling with excitement. If he could get these 3 instruments, his experiment would be more smooth. He thought of Crimson Moon and couldn't help but feel a trace of regret for her. If Crimson Moon knew about the giant wall and got these 3 artifacts, perhaps the experiment would have been successful. At this time, the sky was bright. The sound of knights training came from the training field behind the castle. The servants of the castle came out to work one after another. They carried water, washed clothes, and dried quilt. Dean put the witch blood technique in his arms and said, "Let's go out for a walk. I'll have to ask Barit about this." The Black Wizard's eyelids twitched when he saw Dean put away the witch blood technique. He knew that Dean had a handle on him. "Did you ask him about the experiment?" Okay. If I meet the guard, tell him that you are taking me out to do something." Dean opened the door and said. The Black Wizard sighed bitterly and followed Dean. When the 2 went downstairs, the Black Wizard was in front and Dean was behind. Out of the burned castle, the position of the 2 was changed. Dean walked along the street with his hands behind his back and said, "The other master supported by the Byrne family seems to be colluding with you, right?" The Black Wizard was surprised. He didn't expect Dean to know this. He suddenly felt that he couldn't see through Dean. The other side obviously didn't sneak into the castle for 2 days and knew so many secrets. It was likely that the other side had been paying attention to him for a long time. Thinking of this, the Black Wizard became more cautious. "He and I are in a cooperative relationship." The Black Wizard weighed his words. Dean nodded slightly as he got the Black Wizard's acknowledgement. Dean went into a pub and ordered some good dishes to eat and drink. The Black Wizard frowned as he accompanied Dean. He was thinking of ways to get out of this situation, but he couldn't think of any way. After the meal, Dean bought a set of high-class clothes to set off the temperament of a young elite of the upper class. Then he bought a set of clothes to go to the black shop at night. He took the black wizard to hire a carriage and wandered around the city. He lifted the window and enjoyed the scenery along the way. From time to time, he would sigh. The black wizard was at a loss as he didn't know what Dean wanted to do. Dean changed 8 carriages. In just one day he went around the entire Phoenix City. 2 Abyss Masters and 27 Masters. This is the power of the Phoenix Lord. The carriage passed by the Phoenix Lord's manor. Dean also saw the background of the Phoenix Lord. He sighed in his heart. The Phoenix Lord alone was enough to easily crush Sylvia. In the evening, the Black Wizard led Dean and the Black Wizard to the most lively black shop in the city. This was the most lively place and naturally the place with the highest consumption. The black shop was located in a bustling street. The shops on the street were jewelry, hotels, weapons shops, real estate rental places and so on. Most of the people who came here were celebrities. The black shop was located in the underground of the entire street. There were 3 entrances. One of them was the underground passage of the tallest hotel on the street. According to the Black Wizard, the reason why there were 3 entrances was not only for convenience but also for quick evacuation when the law enforcers of the temple were searching. However, this black shop was under the protection of the Phoenix Lord. The law enforcers of the temple wouldn't come over. It was the safest black shop. After coming out of the secret passage of the hotel, Dean saw a bright underground world. There were colorful lights hanging from the dome. Electricity was very popular here. All kinds of lighting bulbs were manufactured in a variety of styles. There were a large number of shops on both sides of the long passage. The owners of the shops were wearing ghost masks. They were waving flagpoles with advertising slogans to attract customers. It was very lively. Dean and the Black Wizard were also wearing masks. One had a leopard's head and the other had a wolf's head. They were mixed in the crowd. The wizards in the crowd were also wearing different types of masks. Some were wearing veils and masks to hide their faces in the dark. Dean's eyes swept along the shops on both sides of the street. He saw a lot of novel things. There were a lot of instruments used for experiments. He even saw a small flashlight and an electronic watch. In addition to these things, the more eye-catching were some experimental materials. Some were limbs soaked in jars. Some were the hearts of some rare monsters. There was also a red test tube marked with the blood of an aristocrat. Dean asked the Black Wizard in a low voice. He learned that the ancestor of this aristocrat was a king. He had an extremely outstanding fighting power. In the elder generation of this aristocrat, someone had awakened and gained extraordinary fighting power. Therefore, the blood of this aristocrat had good research value. Dean saw a microscope in one of the largest shops. The price of the microscope was slightly higher than what the Black Mage had said. It was 98,000 black gold coins. The price has increased again. Fortunately, I bought it early. The Black Wizard also saw it. He couldn't help but sigh. Dean walked around and saw the phonograph, camera, and other small items. The price was not cheap. The phonograph was 8,000 black gold, and the camera was 20,000 black gold. Dean asked the Black Mage to buy a set of the highest grade one for each of them. They walked in the passage while carrying the goods in their hands. The shop owners on both sides of the street were shouting at Dean and the Black Wizard even more enthusiastically. After visiting the shops, Dean and the Black Wizard came to the black shop at the end of the street. According to the Black Wizard, this was the place responsible for the wizard's registration and handling all kinds of wizard's problems. Dean went in and walked around. He knew that the Black Wizard's words were not false. He pulled a woman wearing a black robe and a rabbit mask and asked, "Have you heard of the 3 artifacts of the wizards? Tell me about them." The woman wearing the rabbit mask was suddenly pulled by Dean. Her body was startled. She looked at Dean coldly and said, "Let go." Dean glanced at the Black Wizard and gestured to him. The Black Wizard slightly smiled and coughed. He took out a black medal from his black robe. It was engraved with 5 stars. The woman wearing the rabbit mask saw the medal. The coldness in her eyes suddenly turned into astonishment. She hurriedly said, You are the holy shaman?" The black wizard lightly coughed and said, "Tell him about the 3 artifacts." He knew that Dean wanted to confirm his words. Fortunately, he didn't lie and he wasn't weak. The woman wearing the rabbit mask was stunned. She quickly reacted and immediately explained to Dean. Her attitude was very respectful and detailed. After listening, Dean slightly nodded. It was roughly the same as what the black wizard said. He asked, "Do you know where the Wizard King lives?" The woman wearing the rabbit mask revealed a trace of strange color in her eyes. She shook her head and said, "I don't know. This is not something they can understand." The black wizard said. Chapter 10:27. Dark Mage was scared by Dean's words. Find the Wizard King? Do you want the 3 artifacts? Dean didn't deny. Lead the way and tell me about the Wizard King. Black Mage's face changed as he saw that Dean was serious. He quickly stepped forward and lowered his voice. Elder, this is not a trivial matter. Let's discuss it again. I'm begging you. Dean strode forward as if he didn't hear anything. The black wizard was a little anxious and followed closely beside him. He lowered his voice and said quickly, "Sir, the Mage King's whereabouts are uncertain. Even I don't know where he lives. We won't be able to find him. If you want the 3 divine weapons, I have other ways that might be able to satisfy your needs." Dean's eyes lit up. "Let's hear it." The dark wizard heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly said, "My lord, the 3 divine tools that you want should be used for witchcraft or something, right? We can totally replace them with other divine tools that have similar functions, just that the effects are slightly weaker." "For example?" Dean frowned. The dark magician said in a low voice, "According to what I know, imitations of these 3 great divine weapons have appeared before. Someone had studied the effects of these 3 great divine weapons and wanted to recreate these 3 great divine weapons. Although their effects couldn't compare to the 3 great divine weapons in the end, they were still considered top-notch sorcerer weapons. Their names are the Eye of Divine Light, the Universal Magic Mirror, and the soul-captivating Divine Pearl. Moreover, apart from these 3 replicas, there are also a few top-notch wizard artifacts that have similar effects as the Eyes of God. They're considered as strengthened versions of the microscopic mirror. It's just that they're expensive, and they're all owned by their owners, so they're not sold on the market." "Do you know the owners of these artifacts?" Dean asked. The dark wizard nodded and said in a low voice, "Rather than looking for the Wizard King, why don't we look for these people first? If the wizard artifacts in their hands can't satisfy you, it won't be too late for us to look for the Wizard King. Don't you agree?" Dean nodded slightly. This was a good idea. He didn't want to provoke a tough bone like the Wizard King unless he had no other choice. But he had to figure out his physical condition as soon as possible. If he could survive, he had to hurry to find Aisha so that she wouldn't wander alone into the Devil's Pit or the area near the Empire. Although her strength had long been a middle-level abyss walker and was enough to run amok in the abyss, there were many existences in the center of the Devil's Pit that were enough to threaten the upper abyss, such as the Arctic dragon that they had killed. Seeing that Dean had agreed, the dark mage was relieved. He was glad that he had managed to persuade Dean. If Dean had really planned to look for the Wizard King, he would most likely have become cannon fodder. "It's not a good place to talk about this, sir. Let's go out first?" The black mage whispered to Dean as he looked at the wizards passing by. Dean looked at him, nodded and followed him out of the black shop. The night was shrouded in darkness and the stars dotted the sky. Dudian and the black mage rented a room in a nearby hotel. Dudian casually sat on the sofa and said to the black mage, "Speak." The black mage coughed and sat down on the sofa opposite to Dean. "Of the 3 artifacts, the Universal Magic Mirror and the Soul Bead are in the hands of the 8 lords. The eye of God is in the hands of the Vice President of the Wizard Council. These three are not to be trifled with, especially the Vice President of the Council. He is a master of the abyss. Moreover, 2 of his students have stepped into the abyss. It is said that the strength of the Vice President is much more tyrannical than that of the 8 lords. Dean frowned slightly. He was most concerned about the eye of God. It was a super-enhanced version of the microscope. It should be able to see the molecular level and even the quark level. Dark Mage secretly glanced at Dean's expression and immediately said, "Elder, in addition to the 3 artifacts, there are 2 top-level artifacts that also have the ability to observe the microscopic world. Moreover, they are stronger than the Eye of God. They are the Eye of Destruction and the Lightning Filter. It is said that the Lightning Filter can see the movement of electricity. It is very magical." Dean's eyes lit up. Can see the movement of electricity? Doesn't it mean that he can see the electronic level? Who has the lightning filter? Dean immediately asked. The lightning filter is in the hands of a member of the Wizard Council. Elder, if you want, we can think of a way to get it. I know some information about this member. His name is Brank. He has the power of the Dominator level. However, it is said that every member has the protection of the Abyss level. He is in his 50s but has created 6 5-star witchcraft. Each of them is enough to cause a devastating disaster in the city. Moreover, it is said that he has created a weapon called an electric gun. This weapon is classified as a taboo weapon and is not used. However, the guards around him are definitely equipped with this weapon. It is said that the power of the electric gun is more than 100 times that of a gunpowder gun. It is impossible to dodge and the attack arrives in an instant. Moreover, it has a paralyzing effect. Even a group of pioneers with an electric gun can shoot the Dominator. Because of this, it is listed as a taboo by the Wizard King. Electric gun. Dean was startled. He thought of the laser gun. However, Brank had mastered the lightning filter. He should have relied on the lightning filter to invent this thing. It was still different from the laser gun. However, it was undeniable that if what the Black Mage said was true, then the electric gun was also a very terrible weapon. Do you know where he lives? Dean asked. The Black Mage coughed and said in a slightly embarrassed manner, "Well, the addresses of the members are very secretive. I don't know. Moreover, the members should have another identity. I don't know what the free identity of this member of the Parliament Brank is. However, from his previous resume, it seems that he is not short of money. He should come from a rich family." Speaking of this, his old face turned red. In the entire giant wall of Berga, there were at least 30,000 rich families. Dean frowned and thought for a moment. He suddenly asked, "Where do these members usually meet?" The Black Mage was relieved to see that Dean didn't blame him. When Dean asked, his eyes lit up and he quickly said, "The members of the Parliament have several different meetings. The corresponding meeting places are also different. If it is a particularly big event, all the members of the Parliament will be called for a meeting at the headquarters of the Black Shop. If there is a problem in the area under the jurisdiction of a member of the Parliament, the Wizard King will send a representative to inquire about the situation and hold a temporary meeting with the local member of Parliament." He didn't wait for Dean to ask again. He excitedly said, "Elder, I know the jurisdiction of Brank. He is in the main city of the Nile Lord. He manages all the dark channels in the territory of the Nile Lord. As long as we cause trouble in the territory of the Nile Lord and break the rules of the wizards, the Wizard King will certainly send someone to find out the situation. At that time, we can lurk in the dark and find Brank." Dean got up. "Let's go." Before preparing to leave the Phoenix territory, the Black Mage handed a letter to the postman in front of Dean and sent it to the Born Lord. It could be regarded as a leave of absence. Then he followed Dean to the Nile territory. The Nile territory and the Phoenix territory were separated by a great distance. The two rushed through the suburbs. After half a day, they arrived in front of the Nile territory. After paying the entrance fee, they entered the main city of the Nile territory. The main city of the Nile territory was similar to the main city of the Phoenix territory. It was grand and spectacular. The security here seemed to be stricter than the Phoenix territory. From time to time, they could see teams of patrolling guards passing through the streets. What do you think is the fastest way to attract their attention? After entering the city, Dean asked the Black Mage as they walked on the street. The Black Mage saw that Dean had thrown this problem to him. He rolled his eyes and said, "Elder, we might as well secretly hunt some wizards. If we hunt a lot of them, it will certainly attract their attention. But they are your peers." Dean glanced at him. "I'm killing my peers." The Black Mage looked natural. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong. Dean shook his head. "That's too slow. I think that your witch blood technique can come in handy." The Black Mage's face slightly changed. He quickly said, "Elder, are you going to use the witch blood technique in the city? This will cause too much turmoil, and the damage will be too terrible. If the movement is not big, how can we attract their attention so quickly? But the people in the city are innocent. They are all our compatriots. Killing innocent people like this," Dean glanced at him. "How can the bones buried in the ground of Burn Manor be able to endure these words coming out of your mouth?" The Black Mage's face stiffened. He was embarrassed and no longer tried to persuade him. He had already guessed that the reason why Dean chose to use the witch blood technique was not only because the movement was big enough and fast enough. The most important thing was that the witch blood technique was created by him. This was tantamount to putting him in danger. So, he had to cooperate with Dean. Once Dean was finished, the witch blood technique would go out of control and he would be noticed by the Wizard King. Once the order to kill was issued, there would be no place for him in the whole world. I don't have the witch blood poison with me. How about we forget about it?" The Black Mage struggled. "Either go back and get it or find the materials in the nearby black shop to do it on the spot." Dean gave him two choices. The corner of the Black Mage's mouth slightly twitched. He sighed and chose to find the materials nearby to do it himself. Because the amount of witch blood poison he left in the Bourne family was very small, it wouldn't cause too much movement. 3 days later, Dean and the Black Mage sneaked into an underground public well in the city of Nile and put the witch blood poison into it. This well provided clothing, food, housing and transportation for thousands of families every day. But these people who used the public well were the lowest level of the city. They were like rats in every corner of the city, doing hard labor, service and so on. Every morning when the weather was cold, their wives would rush to the public well to fetch water to wash their clothes and then scoop water to bring back to cook. When the sky was bright, there was a long queue in front of the public well. The supply of well water could not meet the demand. In addition to the public well, Dean also sneaked into the manors of 2 minor nobles and put the witch blood poison into their well water. "Next, we'll wait for your witch blood technique to break out." Dean and the Black Mage sat on a tall building, overlooking the building under their feet. The scenery from high places was always extremely vast. The Black Mage looked at the streets under the tall building. The passers-by were as small as ants. There was a smile on his face, but his heart was cold. Although he had caught a lot of people as test subjects, but the number of people he caught each time was not more than 10 because it was easy to be exposed if he caught too many. But this time Dean had killed thousands of people. He felt that he was ruthless enough, but the youth was colder and more vicious than him. In order to achieve the goal, he would do anything. On the 5th day after the witch blood poison was put in, bloodthirsty fights broke out one after another. It not only attracted the attention of the Defense Department in Nile territory, but also caused the black shops in the dark to close one after another. Many black shops were no longer open. It seems that the matter is almost fermented. We can go to the headquarters of Nile's black shop to have a look. The Black Mage took Dean out of a black shop and immediately turned towards the city center of Nile territory. Your 5-star wizard medal doesn't belong to this area. Can you go in? Dean asked. He had learned a lot of things from the Black Mage in the past few days. The wizards here were similar to the Dark Church in Sylvia. They couldn't see the light. He couldn't help but think that the Wizard King was played by the Wall Lord himself. There's no problem going in, but we can't participate in their meetings here. The Black Mage laughed. Dean nodded. The two came to the front of a manor in the city center of Nile territory. It was a huge manor. There were well-equipped knights standing in front of the gate. It looked more imposing than the Stantine and Bourne families that Dean had seen before. The Black Mage looked fearless. He whispered a few words in front of a knight, and then lifted his robe to reveal his chest. There was a black flame tattoo engraved on it. The knight who was ready to intercept was startled. He immediately stepped aside and gave way. His face was full of respect. The Black Mage put down his robe and strode forward. Dean followed behind, but his identity was not checked. After entering the manor, Dean immediately used his X-ray vision to scan the situation inside the manor. Soon, he found that there was a huge square under the manor. It was very lively. At the moment, there were many people gathered there, emitting firefly-like heat sources. Most of them were at the limitless level. A few of them were at the pioneer level, but only a few of them emitted heat sources as strong as the sun. They were masters like the Black Mage. However, there were also masters who knew how to hide the heat sources. The underground defense was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Chapter 10:28. 20 black gold coins for a radiation baby? Boss, you are robbing us. The shops in the underground world were very lively. A voice of dissatisfaction came from a shop on the left side of Dean and the Black Mage. Dean followed the voice and saw that the counter of the black shop was piled with all kinds of bottles and specimens nailed to wooden shelves. Most of them were strange flesh and blood or some kind of limbs. Some of the bottles and jars were soaked with intact human babies. However, the soaked babies were somewhat deformed. Some had strange hands growing out of their abdomen. Some had cracked arms with a strange mouth. Dean saw that Dean was interested, so he whispered, "This person is buying radiation babies. It is a low-level witchcraft research material. It is also one of the raw materials of witch blood poison. The price is very cheap, but it is a bit expensive here. Generally, 10 black gold coins are enough. It's probably because the other black shops have all closed down, so the goods here have increased in value." Dean took back his eyes and asked as he walked forward, "Can this radiation baby be sold for 10 black gold coins?" 10 black gold coins were equivalent to 100 gold coins. In his knowledge, the orphans in the orphanage were sold for a few silver coins. These orphans lived in slums, drank heavily polluted water, ate poor quality bread, and had long been eroded by radiation. They could be regarded as radiation people. The Black Mage smiled. Most of the radiation babies sold in the black shop are of good quality. The radiation is more than 70%. For the average person to accumulate radiation in their body to such a degree, they need to live in a heavily polluted radiation zone for at least 2 or 3 years. If a newborn baby lives in such an environment, it is estimated that it will die in less than 3 days. Dean frowned. What are these? The infection of these radiation babies comes from the mother's body. Their mother's body itself has a high concentration of radiation. They live in a high radiation zone when they are pregnant. So when they are born, the radiation concentration in their body will exceed the limit. Moreover, they won't die. The Black Mage smiled. Some babies in the mother's body can't withstand the radiation contained in the mother's body. They will die early. So it is quite time-consuming and laborious to make radiation babies. 10 black gold coins is not expensive, but 20 is a bit too much. Dean was silent. What kind of horrible and dark industrial chain was this? Such an industrial chain was one of the many products in the black shop. Did you hear? Camp District was attacked by witchcraft. I've known about it for a long time. I don't know which bastard did it, but he caused all the black shops to close down and reorganize, causing the items in the headquarters to be sold at sky-high prices. My experiment just happened to reach a bottleneck, and I urgently need materials. Damn it. It's probably some wandering wizard who did it. How despicable. The people living in Camp District are all civilians. It's understandable if this person cast witchcraft on some nobles or rich people. At least he can make some money. What's there to harm those useless people in Camp District? The energy wasted to kill them is worth more than their lives. With such a huge commotion, this idiot is definitely done for. The masked wizards around him were talking among themselves, and the witch blood spell was mentioned from time to time. The dark magician's hearing was extraordinary, so he naturally heard everything. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. This was the first time he had been scolded by so many people, and they were all in the same profession. He looked at Dean and said in an aggrieved tone, "Elder, you can't ignore me if the witch blood technique is found out." Dean glanced at him. "Even if you are found out, you have the means to get out." The dark magician smiled. "Elder, you think too highly of me. Can you sense it? Which one is Brank?" Dean looked at the towering building at the end of the underground square. His eyes flashed. The dark magician's eyes showed a bit of seriousness. He carefully looked at the building for a moment, then shook his head. "I can't sense it. There is a strange fragrance outside the shop, so I can't smell out the situation inside." Dean slightly frowned. He also smelled the strange fragrance. The fragrance was very light, but it lingered around the building for a long time. It was like a fragrant barrier that shrouded the building. However, it didn't affect his X-ray vision. There were so many people inside, and there was no dark magician to point out Brank's identity. He could only rely on himself to slowly observe. At this time, there was a sudden commotion behind the square. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" A shout came from behind. The crowd quickly crowded and pushed Dean and the dark magician to the side of the road. Dean turned around and saw a group of knights in black armor with dark red scepter patterns striding from the back. In the middle of the team of knights was a black-robed figure wearing a smiling fox mask. "It's Brank. How come he is here? Don't you know? It must be because of the matter in camp area. It seems that the rogue wizard who caused trouble will be punished soon." The crowd was talking about it. Dean was startled. He didn't expect the latter to appear so quickly. It was so easy to get him. He looked at the dark magician. The dark magician whispered, "Elder, I'm not familiar with Brank. They are local wizards. You can't blame me. I absolutely didn't mean to hide." Dean made a shushing gesture and looked up at Brank, who was slowly walking under the escort of the Black Knights. Golden light flashed in his eyes. His sight instantly penetrated through the mask. He was a little surprised. Brank's mask wasn't made of ordinary plastic or metal. It was made of some kind of alloy and fiber. It looked like a big net. From the structure, it was not only a mask, but also had a very strong defense. It was estimated that ordinary rifle bullets wouldn't be able to penetrate it. Under the mask was a plain middle-aged man's face. The only thing that left a deep impression was his eyes. They were restrained and calm, deep and wise. It was like two dark stars embedded in his face, embellishing his ordinary face with a unique style. Dean took a deep look and remembered the face. Just as he was about to withdraw his gaze, he suddenly saw something in his line of sight. He could not help but be startled. Immediately, the golden light appeared in his pupils again. His gaze went straight through the fox mask and shot at the middle-aged man's face. Soon, it penetrated again. He suddenly found that what he had seen before was right. This ordinary face was actually a mask. The material was gelatinous and very thin. Double mask. Dean's eyes moved. His sight quickly penetrated the deepest part of the man's brain. Then he quickly withdrew his eyes and pretended to be nonchalant. "Huh!" Brank felt a strange sensation on his face, as if something terrifying was staring at him. He turned his gaze to the crowd on both sides of the road. He saw many strange masks, as well as expressions of excitement, surprise, respect, and indifference behind the mask. Among them, there was no lack of hatred that flashed across the eyes of some of them. Brank caught it. However, he didn't feel that the man with hatred in his eyes was strong. "What's going on?" Brank was puzzled. The strange feeling had disappeared. It was like an illusion, but the feeling of horror was very real. He suddenly felt that the wizard attack in the Kemp district was not just an ordinary wizard breaking the rules. Maybe there was some other conspiracy behind it. Soon, Brank walked past him. Dean quietly watched him leave and entered the palace-like building behind the square. The crowd that had been split apart gathered together again and dispersed. "Are you sure that Brank is in his 50s? Dean stared at the black mage and asked after the crowd dispersed. The sorcerer was surprised and quickly said, "Elder, many wizards know this. If you don't believe me, you can ask them. I've also heard about it. If I'm wrong, then everyone is wrong." "Is there any wizard here who can restore the appearance of a man in his 50s to the appearance of a young man in his 20s? Dean asked. The sorcerer was stunned. He knew that Dean was referring to Brank. But wasn't Brank wearing a mask? How did Dean know that his face was that of a young man in his 20s? Soon, he thought of Dean's perception ability. His eyes flashed a trace of shock, but soon he realized that he couldn't let Dean know that he was aware of it. He quickly took the opportunity to say, "A man in his 50s has the face of a young man in his 20s? How is that possible?" Dean frowned as he looked at him. He didn't say anything as he turned and walked towards the palace. The sorcerer quickly caught up with him. "Elder, let's wait outside. It's too dangerous to go in." "I know." Outside the palace, Dean stopped in front of a shop and asked the black mage to buy a few tools. Then the two of them rested in a corner. "It seems that his identity is real," Dean murmured in his heart. Golden light flashed in his eyes. Through his X-ray vision, he saw that the people along the way took the initiative to greet him. The people who were sitting quickly stood up and the people who were standing quickly greeted him. Their attitude was very respectful. It seemed that this wasn't a disguise of a stand-in. After Brank entered the building, he called more than a dozen people to have a meeting on the 3rd floor. Dean could read their lips. They were talking about the witch's blood. Dean quietly watched them discuss and make decisions. His eyes turned to the 8 black knights who accompanied Brank. All of them were equipped with a knight's spear and a sword. At first glance, they didn't look any different from ordinary knights. However, their physiques were quite amazing. Although all of them had suppressed the heat reaction, but the density of the bones and the internal structure of the body were all at the Dominator level. Dean used X-ray vision to observe the body structure of people with different physique. He already had a set of methods to distinguish the strength of the internal organs of the body. Bone density was just one of them. He found that the higher the physique, the more complex the internal structure of the body. The number of bones and the changes of the nerves were completely different from normal humans. This was the transformation of the magic marks. The higher the physique, the larger the transformation of the body. This kind of modified body was also more suitable for a larger area of the demon body, or even a full demon body. He should be at the peak of the Dominator level. His bones have grown scales, and his heart is surrounded by complex ribs. It seems that his ability should be related to defense. Dean's eyes lit up. Even if such a fighting capacity wasn't as good as the Abyss, it wouldn't be much worse. If their ability was special, then they could even trap and kill the Abyss. Brank is a member of Parliament, but he isn't an Abyss. He should be lacking the Iceworm King. Dean thought. It seemed that even in the giant wall, the Iceworm King was a rare existence. It meant that it would be extremely difficult for Barton and the others to advance to the Abyss level. 2 hours later, the meeting ended. Brank went to the office in the building to check the document. Dean waited for him to come out after 4 or 5 hours. He called the black magician and followed the 8 knights to leave the underground black shop. "Elder, should we follow them?" the black mage asked Dean. He didn't see Brank and the 8 knights outside the manor. He tried to use his sense of smell to track them, but found that the smell had disappeared. "Don't worry, we will be exposed if we get too close," Dean said. He suspected that Brank had noticed him when he used his X-ray vision. Brank had ordered his men to pay attention to the people who were going in and out of the Nile shop's headquarters. They had to register their names to prevent people from sneaking in. "But they are gone," the black mage said anxiously. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Dean's eyes flashed. Out of the manor, Dean quickly moved forward, jumped to the roof of the street, and quickly chased in one direction. The black mage saw that Dean seemed to be able to find Brank, so he quickly followed. 10 minutes later, Dean and the black mage stopped under a towering clock tower. The black mage looked ahead and saw a few streets away. There were 8 figures in black robes riding fast horses. They were escorting a person in the same black robe. These people stopped in front of a red wine manor. There were many guests coming in and out of the manor. The black mage's face slightly changed. "He is going to mix into the crowd," Dean whispered. "I've locked him." The black mage looked at him and saw the golden light in Dean's eyes. He inexplicably felt a trace of palpitation. At this time, Dean saw Brank and his 8 guards enter the red wine manor. They went straight to the cellar. The cellar was full of wine and ordinary guests couldn't enter. Soon, Brank and the 8 guards were served by a graceful and beautiful woman behind the counter of the red wine manor. They took off all the masks and put on suits, tuxedos and so on. After a while, the 8 guards and Brank came out of the manor. They were like successful people as they mixed into the surrounding guests. Chapter 10:29. Dean watched Brank and others leave the winery. They took the carriage that was already prepared at the entrance. After they left, he called the black mage and called a carriage from the side of the street. Outside the winery was a bustling area. There were often carriages coming here to pull guests, so he didn't have to wait too long. "Have they come out?" The black mage was surprised to see Dean call a carriage. He had carefully observed all the people that came out of the winery but didn't find anything suspicious. Dean didn't answer him. He turned around and got into the carriage. The black mage quickly followed. The coachman whipped the horse and slowly drove the carriage. The coachman asked the 2, "Where are you going?" "Go straight ahead," Dudian ordered. There's no name of the place." Before the coachman could finish his words, a gold coin bounced onto the chair beside him, causing it to tremble slightly. His eyelids also trembled slightly, and the words in his mouth immediately stopped. For him, a gold coin was equivalent to half a month's travel. Moreover, the business was booming. The coachman didn't talk anymore and drove the carriage forward. "Turn left at the intersection in front," Dean commanded. "Yes, sir." The coachman hurriedly responded and turned the carriage. 2 hours later, the carriage stopped in front of a magnificent and spacious manor. Outside the manor, there were 2 knights stationed every 200 meters, all of whom were pioneers. There were 12 knights in silver armor guarding the front gate. Through the gaps of the iron bars of the front gate, Zhang Tai could see the verdant grassland in the manor, which extended far away. At the end of the grassland, there were the outlines of towering buildings. "It's here." The black mage was surprised. "We have passed by this street several times before." "Why?" Suddenly he realized that the other side was worried about being followed and deliberately took a detour. Dean got off the carriage. In his field of vision, Brank and his 8 guards had entered the manor in batches. The area of the manor was very large. It was equivalent to the area of 5 international football fields. Horses could gallop on the gravel path inside the manor. 3 rulers. Dudien's eyes flashed as he saw the scene in the manor. In addition to Brank and his 8 guards, there were 3 rulers in the manor. They didn't hide the heat source, but their aura was much stronger than the 8 guards. Black Mage whispered to Dudien, We will wait for the night. The vigilance is too strong during the day. Dean shook his head. You will think so, but others will think so too. The night is more vigilant. No one would think that someone would dare to break in during the day. For the people here, there is no difference between night and day. They can only hide from the eyes and ears of ordinary nights. Black Mage was startled but immediately felt that Dean's words were reasonable. He asked, should we make a plan? Let's first understand the guards here. It's best to sneak in or disguise as a servant. Dean looked up and glanced around. After a moment he said, make some noise to attract his guards. I'll take the opportunity to sneak in and find Brank. Black Mage's eyes widened. I'll attract his guards? Isn't this too difficult? You're trying to kill me. Although he was also a ruler, he was not good at fighting. The other side had 7 or 8 rulers. Letting him attract the firepower was no different from sending himself to death. He felt that Dean was ready to use him as a sacrificial pawn. Suddenly, another idea came to his mind. Dean indifferently said, you can't think of things in this way. First of all, you will attract the firepower and they will chase you. Once they catch up with you and find out that Brank and their master are missing, they will soon understand that they have fallen into a trap. They will know that you have accomplices. Will they still kill you? Of course not. They will torture you and make you confess. At this time, I can kidnap Brank and come back to rescue you. At that time, you will be alive and Brank will fall into our hands. It will be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. At most, you will suffer a little. Black Mage was stunned and looked at him. After a few seconds, he suddenly reacted. It seemed that it was the truth. However, he wasn't a person who could be fooled by a few words. He doubtfully asked, how can you be sure that you will catch Brank? In case you can't catch him and the plan fails, then I will fall into their hands. Won't I die? Because I need the thunderbolt filter. So I will catch him. Dean indifferently said, if it wasn't for the fact that the other forces in the city or the Lord of Nile would come to support us, then you wouldn't need to do anything. I can solve it by myself. But it's not safe enough. In case they have some special ability and are pinned down, then things will go to an unpredictable step. Black Mage was stunned when he saw that Dean had taken reinforcements into consideration. He suddenly felt that Dean's considerations were more thorough than his own. No wonder Dean was able to sneak into the Bourne family and arrest him so easily. At this moment they had a common goal. He suddenly felt that it was a good thing to have a partner like Dean. He thought for a moment. According to you, the more guards I attract, the greater the chance of success? Yes. Black Mage took a deep breath. All right, I'll do it. Dean was more or less surprised as he looked at Black Mage. He thought that he would have to waste a lot of time. He didn't expect Black Mage to think it through. Dark Mage agreed very quickly. But he had already thought about it. Even if he refused, Dean would send him. He was now a prisoner and had no choice. So it was better to take the initiative to agree. Moreover, he felt that he was useful to Dean. Dean wouldn't abandon him so easily as long as he could capture Brank. His heart was full of confidence as he thought about the terrifying tail blade that Dean had used to suppress him. Although his fighting strength belonged to the lower level of the Dominators, but his vision wasn't bad. He could see that Dean was an abyss expert. No matter how strong Brank was, it would be difficult for him to resist an abyss expert. After making the decision, the Black Magician and Dean discussed the details again. Then he went to the side of the manor alone and suddenly appeared. He killed the 2 knights in front of the side wall and then flew into the manor like a rock spreading its wings. He quickly rushed towards the castles in the distance. Enemy attack! Someone broke in. Someone, come quickly! Someone has broken in. Alarms sounded all over the manor. A large number of patrolling knights quickly rushed to the front of the castle. They saw the Black Mage rushing towards them. Black Mage was wearing a mask. He roared as he rushed into the patrolling knights. He was like a wolf in a flock of sheep. He killed several people in an instant. His attacks were extremely cruel. In a short time his whole body was stained with blood. "You're courting death." A thunderous roar echoed from the top of the castle. A figure flew out from the top floor of the castle. He was holding a golden spear as he attacked the Black Mage. Black Mage roared as he threw the knight next to him. Puff! The golden spear pierced through the knight's body. The latter didn't care about the life or death of the knight. Blood feud. "I'll kill you!" The Black Mage roared towards the sky, his voice echoing throughout several ancient castles. He entered his demonic body and leaped up to meet the golden divine spear. His demonized hand slapped the spear's shaft, and with a bang, he felt his hand go numb from the impact. He couldn't help but shiver in fear. He borrowed the force to retreat and turned into a black shadow, fleeing at top speed. "Want to leave?" The young man with the golden spear roared, and a pair of dragon wings extended from his back. His entire body was demonized, and his golden armor cracked and fell to the ground. He turned into a golden dragon and chased after the dark sorcerer. At the same time, 4 figures suddenly flew out of the castle and followed closely behind him. "Get out! Get out!" Black Mage roared as he looked at the patrolling knights. He was flustered and exasperated. He could feel that in addition to the youth with the golden spear, there were 4 more people chasing after him. Their strength wasn't inferior to his. He didn't dare to think about fighting against 5 people. He just wanted to escape as far as possible to buy time for Dean. He knew that the longer he delayed, the higher the chance of Dean's success and the greater his chance of survival. Therefore, he had to try his best to attract Dean's firepower. He even deliberately talked about blood feud to let Brank know that he was his enemy. Once he let such an enemy go, who knew where he would hide and shoot arrows at him in the future? That was why Brank would definitely send more people to chase after him, just to be safe. However, if he sent 4 more people at once they caught up to him or pinned him down, he would probably be defeated very quickly. Whoosh! The dark magician charged into the group of patrolling knights like a tyrannosaurus, waving his sharp claws and tearing apart the knights blocking his way. The soles of his feet left huge pits in the ground as he charged out of the manor in the blink of an eye. He immediately ran toward the crowded street. Whoosh! The golden dragon roared as it chased after him at full speed. "Father, is this ruler your enemy?" Inside the ancient castle, in front of the window of an office stood a handsome blond young man. He had sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, a high nose bridge, and thin lips that appeared a little sharp and fickle. At this moment, he was looking into the distance and only withdrew his gaze after he saw the golden wyvern and the 4 people behind him disappear from his sight. Then, he asked Bolink, who was sitting in the office, who was grading document. Brank said indifferently, "Since he broke into here, naturally he is my enemy." The golden-haired youth looked at his father's calm expression, and his heart was filled with admiration, yearning, and worship. Ever since he was young, no matter what happened, his father was always so calm, as if nothing could make him lose his composure. "Although our family's businesses have some gray income, but it shouldn't provoke such an enemy." "Is it a wizard?" the blond youth asked curiously. "That I don't know," Brank said indifferently. "I've offended too many people in this line of work, too many to count. Maybe it's a sorcerer whose witchcraft was stolen, or a child of a broken family who went astray and grew up to become a ruler with hatred in his heart. Maybe it's a bastard child of a woman." The blond youth was startled. He couldn't help but sigh softly. Indeed, a tall tree attracts the wind. Apart from the people they offended, the people their family's subordinates offended outside would also blame it on them. There were too many enemies to count, however. He wasn't afraid. Instead, he felt proud. The number of enemies meant that they were extraordinary. After all, the more ordinary a person was, the fewer enemies they had. Just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly felt a gust of cold wind at his neck. The air turned cold, as if winter had suddenly arrived. He couldn't help but look at the window behind him. The trees in the courtyard outside were filled with yellowed maple leaves. It was still autumn. Why was it so cold? When he retracted his gaze and was about to ask his father more questions, he suddenly noticed that there was another figure in the room. It was a young man in a black robe with a hood over his head. However, the hood had already been taken off, revealing a leopard mask on his face. It was a little strange. A wizard! The blond youth's pupils shrank. He immediately recognized the attire. He couldn't help but open his mouth to shout, but the next moment, he felt his body stiffen. It was as if the blood in his body had solidified. His limbs were frozen and he couldn't move. The intense fear made his mouth open, but he couldn't make a sound. He could only hear his heart pounding madly. He never thought that there would be anything that could frighten him to this extent. Even if it was a poisonous snake that he hated the most, he wouldn't be so scared that he couldn't speak. However, at this moment, he felt an indescribable fear. It was even more terrifying than seeing thousands of poisonous snakes in front of him. He couldn't tell what he was afraid of. It was obviously a human. Brank's face was gloomy. His eyes were fixed on the figure that suddenly appeared in front of him. Even with his perception, he couldn't figure out how this person came here. Moreover, he suddenly realized that sending the 4 guards to chase after him seemed to be a wrong choice. It was the simplest strategy to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but he had fallen into it. "Who are you?" Brank took a deep breath. Under the table, his palm moved very slowly to the bottom of the drawer. There was a button there. At this time, he saw Dean take off the mask. His heart sank. The other side wasn't afraid of revealing his true face. It meant that today's matter wouldn't end well. Whoosh! He quickly touched the button. Puff! The table suddenly cracked. It seemed that the function of the button was to split the table. Brank's finger had just touched the button, but before he could press it, the table had already cracked. Even the wires behind the button were cut and destroyed. Chapter 10:30. Brank's expression turned ugly. He could feel a strange killing intent locking onto him. Any reaction of his body would be detected. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He believed that even if he didn't give the alarm, they would still be aware of the situation here. What he needed to do now was to stabilize the current situation, and it would be best if he could understand the enemy at the same time. "You're in cahoots with the person outside, right?" Brank stared at Dean. "If I'm not wrong, you should be related to the witchcraft incident in camp. What's your purpose? To kill me? Or do you want to get something from me?" "It's easy to talk to a smart person." Dean smiled. "I heard that you have a tool called Thunder Filter. Can I borrow it?" Brank was startled, but he was relieved in his heart. "What Thunder Filter? I've never heard of it." Dean shook his head. "I just praised you for being smart, and now you're panting. Do you think we didn't investigate in advance when we attacked your house and took such a big risk? Or are you deliberately stalling for time to wait for them to come and rescue you?" Brank's face sank. "Even if the Thunder Filter is in my hands, I won't lend it to you. It's a top-level tool, a treasure that can't be copied. If it's broken, it'll be broken forever. No one knows how to repair it. Even I won't use it easily." Dean looked at him seriously. Their eyes met. Brank also looked at Dean. His eyes were firm and unyielding. "All right." Dean sighed and took the lead to move his eyes away. Brank heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that he had the situation under control for the time being. However, in the next moment, a blood-curdling scream was heard. He looked towards the source of the scream, and his expression immediately changed. Furious, he abruptly stood up from his chair. He saw that the golden-haired youth by the window had a black blade piercing through his heart, nailing his entire body to the wall. The scream did not last for long before it abruptly stopped, and his head drooped down powerlessly. "You." Brank's face was pale. His eyes were wide open. Black mucus surged and quickly entered the devil's body. But when the devil's body was halfway into the devil's body, a figure flashed in front of him. Dean's palm hit his shoulder. Brank felt as if his shoulder was broken. His whole body sank down. The next moment, a touch of coldness and tingling came from his neck. He slightly lowered his eyebrows. He saw that Dean's arm had turned into a sharp blade and was on his neck. The black viscous liquid that was surging all over his body suddenly stopped. Then, like boiling water that had been extinguished, it slowly converged and sank. Your wife, daughter, grandchildren, and your own life are here. Who do you think is more important compared to the thunder filter? Dean softly asked. There was a trace of panic in the depths of his eyes. Dean was more terrible than he had imagined. It was the first time that he met someone who could force him to enter the devil's body. The most important thing was that Dean didn't enter the devil's body. How could he break out such a terrifying speed with just his human body? The most important thing was that the Dean was not the devil's body. Even if the Lord of Nile was here, he may not be able to save him. Suddenly, the door of the room was knocked open. At the same time, the roof above Dean's head burst open and a figure jumped down. In addition, another person jumped into the window. In a blink of an eye, there were 4 people standing in the room, completely surrounding Dean. They were the remaining 4 of the 8 guards who had been guarding Dean. Master! The 4 of them saw Brank, who was held hostage by Dean, and the blond youth who was nailed to the windowsill. They didn't know that the enemy had broken into the room. If it wasn't for the blond youth's scream, they wouldn't have known the situation here. The loyal dog is here. Dean glanced at the 4 of them and smiled. Have you decided? Brank's face changed. After a moment, he took a deep breath and said, I promise you, Master. The 4 of them didn't know what Brank had promised. They couldn't help but call out to each other. They wanted to find a flaw to attack and rescue Brank. Brank knew that the 4 of them couldn't save him from the hands of the devil. He sighed. Don't worry. I'll take him to get the thunder filter. The 4 of them were startled. They knew Dean's purpose and started to slowly retreat. Dean carried Brank out of the room and asked him to show them the way. The 4 of them looked at each other after Dean left the room. 2 of them followed from behind while the other 2 left from another exit. They were going to ambush the thunder filter before Dean did. After a moment, Dean and Brank came to the basement of the castle. They passed through layers of traps. Under Brank's guidance, the traps were cancelled in advance. Finally, the 2 of them stopped in front of a secret room in the basement. The door of the secret room slowly rose and a magical instrument appeared in front of them. So this is the thunder filter? There was a trace of surprise in Dean's eyes. The instrument was like a 3-meter-high globe. However, it wasn't the earth that was embedded in the middle of the instrument but a circular ring. The edge of the metal ring was engraved with mysterious and complex runes. It looked like some kind of language. The ring and the tray of the instrument were connected by a cylindrical mirror. The cylindrical mirror could be bent to be vertical with the instrument. The whole instrument didn't look complicated. In fact, it was quite simple. It was even more common than a microscope. This is the thunder filter you want. Brank's eyes were gloomy. You can take it, but you have to promise me that you won't cause trouble for my family. Dean took him to the front of the thunder filter. He looked at it for a moment and asked, How do I use this thing? Brank hesitated for a moment but still came forward to give him directions. This is the switch. The thunder filter relies on electricity. But there is a battery inside. You can charge it after the battery is used up. This is the observation lens. This is the sample holder lens. This is the multiplier lens. Dean listened carefully. The thunder filter looked very simple. It looked like a simple metal ring. He didn't expect that there would be many small things on it. However, the overall operation wasn't complicated. It was similar to a microscope. Open it and let me see. Dean told Brank. He didn't do it himself. After all, there was electricity in the giant wall. Even if he was an abyss, he would be turned into ashes in front of the overload of voltage. Brank sighed in his heart as he saw Dean being so cautious. But he didn't deceive Dean. He immediately started the operation and opened the thunder filter. When the filter was opened, Dean saw that the metal ring was emitting electric light. The complex runes engraved around the metal ring flashed with mysterious blue light. It was like a circuit that lit up the entire metal ring. Soon, more and more electric light flashed inside the metal ring. It seemed that there was a specific magnetic field inside the ring that was pulling the flashing electric current. It didn't take long for the electric current to form a large net inside the metal ring. It looked extremely shocking. "You are going to observe a strand of hair." Brank pulled a silver hair from his head and threw it into the flashing electric current inside the metal ring. The silver hair was instantly hit by the electric current and turned into powder. At this time, Brank came to the observation lens next to the metal ring. He wasn't afraid of the flashing electric current. He moved his eyes to the cylinder and said, "Now you can see the composition of the hair. Do you want to take a look?" Dean was startled. He didn't expect the use of the thunder filter to be like this. It was the first time that he heard that the object could be decomposed by electric current. Wouldn't the experiment be destroyed? He didn't ask but looked through the observation lens according to Brank's words. However, he did not approach it directly. Instead, he tried his best to observe it from a distance. Soon, he saw countless tiny moving balls in the observation mirror. They were pitch black and looked like black grape. "Is this the structure of the hair?" Dean frowned slightly. He felt that the thunder filter wasn't very useful to him because he didn't know which layer of the hair he was looking at. However, since he had succeeded, he didn't want to waste his effort. "Turn it off," Dean said. Brank immediately turned off the button. The flashing electric current inside the metal ring gradually decreased until it was extinguished. The secret room returned to darkness. There was no sound of electric current flashing. Where did this thing come from? From the ruins? Dean tentatively reached out and touched the metal ring. It was a little warm. He estimated that it would get hot after a long time. He looked at the runes engraved on the ring. He suddenly felt that this thing didn't seem to be from the old era. Indeed, Brank's words confirmed his conjecture. It said that it was found in an ancient civilization spaceship in the depths of the demonic abyss. It's well preserved, but unfortunately, that ancient civilization spaceship seemed to have been destroyed. It's been in disrepair for many years and is now in tatters. At this point, even though he was in danger, Brank still felt that it was a pity. "Sure enough, it belongs to those insects." Dean's eyes flashed. Since the last time he saw the spaceship in the ice dragon's nest, he was basically sure that the insects came from another planet. They were able to cross the sea of stars to invade the Earth. They must have mastered technology that humans didn't have. After all, human technology couldn't carry people out of the solar system before the destruction of the old era. Dean thought that even if it was useless to him at present, it would have a very high research value. "Is there any packaging?" Dean asked Brank. Brank knew that this was the difficult part. "No. It takes several people to carry it carefully. Otherwise it may be damaged if there is a little bump. That's why I haven't moved this thing since it was brought here." Dean slightly frowned and didn't say anything. Brank secretly sneered in his heart. He guessed that Dean wouldn't have too many accomplices. He estimated that there were at most 3 people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent only one person to lure his guards. In case of failure, then, the risk would be too great. Moreover, even if Dean had accomplices, he wouldn't dare to come over. His guards weren't vegetarians. "Well, call your guards." Dean thought for a moment and said. Brank was surprised. "Call them over?" "Help carry it," Dean said. Brank almost choked on his own saliva. He couldn't help but stare at Dean. But in the end he softened as he looked at Dean's unquestionable expression. He felt like he was being robbed by a dog. Not to mention that Dean wanted him to send people to help carry it? Was there such a thing? Was there? Dean left the underground chamber with Brank. He went to the door and looked at the 3 hidden guards. There were 2 guards outside the door who didn't hide their aura. He indifferently said, "All 5 of you come over." The pupils of the 3 guards who were hiding in the dark shrank as they heard Dudian say out the number of people. Their eyes were full of shock. The 3 of them were the best at lurking among the guards. They didn't expect to be seen through by Dudian. From smell? Life response? Heartbeat? Heat? They believed that all of this had been concealed. They were no different from rocks when they hid in the surroundings. Even in the Devil's Pit they were able to hide from the hunters of the abyss. But now they were seen through. Brank's eyelids twitched. He only saw 2 guards, but he knew that there must be an ambush in the dark. He didn't expect Dean to say it out loud. The last trace of hope in his heart was shattered. The one licking his lips, "Why don't you come out?" Dean opened his mouth again. A young man who was hiding in the dark stiffened. He didn't dare to move. But soon, like a deflated ball, he slowly came out from the dark. If he still thought that Dean was deliberately blackmailing him, then his brain was really messed up. The other 2 people hiding in the dark saw this and were shocked. They slowly walked out. "You come and talk to them." Dean looked at the 5 people standing in front of him and said to Brank. Brank's mouth slightly twitched. He resisted the urge to pinch Dean's neck. He gritted his teeth and said, "The 5 of you come with me to the secret chamber. Bring out the thunder filter and help him take it out." The 5 of them were dumbfounded. They looked at each other in dismay. They suspected that their ears were playing tricks on them. But looking at Brank's constipated expression, they were convinced that Dean wasn't joking. 10 minutes later, Dean held Brank hostage and walked out of the manor. The 5 guards behind them were carrying the thunder filter. Their movements were very careful. They didn't dare to let the thunder filter have any damage. "It seems that I won't be able to wait for Lord Nile to come." Dean looked at the street outside the manor and said softly. Chapter 1031. Dean held Brank in his hand as he left the manor. He followed the direction that the Black Mage had escaped to. They jumped over the roofs of the buildings on the street as if they were a group of assassins and thieves wandering on the edge of gray. After a moment, Dean met the Black Mage on a building at the edge of the square. He had been caught and one of his arms was cut off. His whole body was bathed in blood. It seemed that he had experienced a fierce battle. The one holding the Black Mage was a handsome young man with a golden spear. There were 4 guards beside him, all of whom had already released their demonic forms. At this moment, they were leading the Black Mage back the way they came, ready to hand him over to Bolink to deal with. The handsome youth and the others were stunned when they saw Dean and Brank. They didn't expect to see their master here. The Black Mage who was pretending to be in pain stopped when he saw Dean holding Brank. His eyes were stained with sticky blood. His face was full of surprise. He didn't expect that Dean would succeed. Moreover, they found him so quickly. In this way, he was saved from the pain of being escorted back to be interrogated. "Master?" The handsome youth looked at Brank, who had a gloomy face. He saw the 5 people behind Brank and saw that they were carrying the lightning filter. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. They soon understood that they had fallen into the enemy's trap. "How dare you betray the master?" The handsome youth shouted at the 5 people who were carrying the lightning filter. The 5 people's mouths twitched, but they didn't answer. Brank sighed. "You guys, let him go." Dean smiled. "Smart. You know what I'm going to say." Brank didn't feel happy when he was praised by Dean. Instead, he felt insulted. The handsome youth and the 4 people's faces slightly changed. The handsome youth immediately said, "Master, this person is his accomplice. We can't let him go so easily." Then he shouted at Dudian, "You let go of my master and I'll let him go. 1 for 1. Dudian smiled. "Do you think his life can be compared with your master's?" The handsome youth sneered. "Since you have found him, It's hard to say whether he's worth the exchange or not. Really? Dean looked at Bronk. Your slaves don't seem to care about your life and death. In that case, let them open their eyes. For example, like this. His palm turned and Bronk's arm was twisted to 180 degrees. Kacha! Kacha! The sound of bones breaking echoed. Blanc screamed in pain, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Quick, let him go. The handsome youth's face changed. He was shocked. He didn't expect Dean to be so unscrupulous and not afraid to anger him. He wanted to use Dean to torture the hostage face to face and tear off Dean's indifferent mask, but he didn't dare to gamble. Moreover, the chip was his master who had saved his life. Get lost! The handsome youth clenched his teeth and coldly pushed the black mage out. He believed that even if the black mage returned to Dean's side, he would still hold a grudge for today's matter. There would be a gap between the two of them. The black mage was relieved and quickly trotted in front of Dean. His heart was filled with resentment towards the handsome youth. He was afraid that the latter's attitude would be tough. He felt that Dean would really abandon him. After all, his weight couldn't be compared to Brank's. Fortunately, Brank was afraid of death, so he admitted defeat. Otherwise, he would be in real danger today. Let them get out of here, Dean said to Brank. Brank slightly gritted his teeth as he endured the pain and humiliation. You go back first. Master. The handsome youth couldn't help but call out. Be obedient. Brank's voice was a bit heavier. The handsome youth slightly gritted his teeth and finally led the 4 guards to retreat. If I find out that you are secretly following me, I won't lose my life, but I won't live a comfortable life. Dean carried Brank as he passed by them. The handsome youth's eyebrows were raised as he looked at Dean's back. He clenched his fist. Can you walk by yourself? Dean looked at the black sorcerer who was limping in front of him after he got rid of the handsome youth and others. The black mage slightly grinned. There was a bit of pain on his face. It's okay. Fortunately, you came in time. Otherwise, I would have been killed by those bastards. Dean nodded slightly. Since it's okay, you are responsible for carrying the thunder filter. Is there any problem? The black mage was stunned. He slightly opened his mouth and looked at him. Dean didn't seem to be deliberately joking. He looked at the 5 guards carrying the thunder filter and suddenly realized, it will be a bit difficult for me to carry it by myself. Then leave one to help you. Dean quickly made a decision and said to Brank, let 4 of them go and 1 will follow. Brank's face slightly changed. It's impossible. What if you go back on your words after taking away the filter? Either you release me with them and leave with the filter, or they have to follow. You are not qualified to talk about conditions, Dean coldly said. Brank stared at him and suddenly took a deep breath. Really? Don't forget that the filter is in the hands of my people. Your purpose is the thunder filter, right? If something happens to me, my men will smash this lightning filter into pieces. You won't get anything then. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. He didn't expect him to think of this. Being able to become a member of the Wizard Council was really not a simple character. His expression was still indifferent. The destructive thunder filter is not good for anyone. If I'm going to die, then why would I care about it? Brank's expression was very straightforward. He knew that Dean cared about the thunder filter. Even if Dean deliberately tried to hide it, he would be able to see through it. After all, he had been a member of Parliament for many years. This was his bargaining chip and even the hope of a comeback. Everyone takes what they need. You need the thunder filter. I just want to save my life. You want to take me hostage so that you can leave safely. I can assure you that I won't pursue you. But you have to promise me that you won't disturb me and my family in the future. Dean quietly looked at him for a moment. All right, let your people put the lightning filter next to you. Then I'll release you. Brank frowned. What if you don't release me after you remove the filter? It's very simple. The thunder filter is such a big object. It will take 2 people to carry it away. How will I carry the filter if I take you? Dean indifferently said. Brank frowned. He pondered for a moment but eventually agreed. The 5 guards immediately placed the lightning filter on a stable open space. Dudian asked the black mage to look after the filter. Then he brought Brank to the front of the 5 guards. I always keep my word. Let's go. Brank heaved a sigh of relief. The next moment, he suddenly felt a chill on his back, and a tearing pain came from his chest. He lowered his head and saw a sharp blade piercing through his chest, right where his heart was. You. Brank's eyes were full of panic and despair. Dean pulled out the lightning-splitting blade and pushed Brank towards the 5 guards. His body was covered in flames. A special blood-colored bone appeared on his forehead. The sun shined down from the sky. Die. Dean's eyes were cold. His blood-colored bone shot out a few rays of light. The 5 guards were stunned by the sudden turn of events. When Brank's corpse was pushed in front of them, they rushed forward to catch it in a hurry, hoping that Brank was still alive and could be resuscitated. But they found that Brank was completely dead. At the same time, some of them reacted quickly. They were ready to attack Dean, but Dean had already entered the demonic body state. The rays of light from the blood-colored bone on his forehead pierced through the 5 guards' foreheads. Dean felt that his heart was beating a little fiercely, and he even felt a trace of pain. He gasped and his face was pale. He put away the flames on his body, quickly turned around and flew to the front of the thunder filter. He said in a hoarse voice, "Let's go." The black mage was scared by Dean's attack. He clearly saw that the 5 guards were killed in an instant. All of their heads were pierced through. That was 5 dominators. The black mage was shocked when he heard Dean's hoarse voice. His heart was pounding. Was this the fighting power of the Abyss level? No, even in the Abyss it should be a very strong existence, right? He thought in his heart. His hands moved quickly to help Dean move the thunder filter. Holding the filter, the 2 rushed forward and left the place in the blink of an eye. It didn't take long for the 2 to rush out of the main city of Nile territory. The patrolling guards on the city wall desperately chased after them. But they were soon left behind by their speed. The 2 kept running forward and stopped after more than an hour. They came to a wilderness near the giant wall. There were low-level mutant beasts everywhere. Their genes were mutated by radiation. Their hair was rotten and their bodies were oozing pus. The black mage gasped for breath. After putting the thunder filter on the ground, he didn't care about his image. He sat on the ground. One of his arms was cut off. He only had one arm to hold the thunder filter. It was even more strenuous. Huff, huff, why didn't you agree with him? If we took the thunder filter, they would leave obediently. They wouldn't dare to offend us. So we wouldn't have to suffer. I guess the Lord of Nile has been alarmed. We are definitely wanted criminals in his territory. The black mage said while gasping for breath. Dean sat next to him. His chest was slightly heaving up and down. There was some sweat sliding down his cheeks. He wiped it and said in a bad mood, "Of course it would be the best. But how could Bronco be willing to let us take the thunder filter? Once I release him, all he has to do is coordinate with his 5 guards to attack the thunder filter, and we will have no choice but to protect the thunder filter. At that time, the initiative will be in their hand. Once we are in a stalemate, the other guards and the Lord of Nile will arrive, and even more powerful figures will be alerted. Our plan will fall short of success, and we will also be exposed." The black mage was stunned. After listening to Dean's words, he realized that it was indeed a very dangerous thing. It was difficult to guarantee that Bronco wouldn't go crazy and attack the thunder filter to pin them down. "You are very thoughtful." The black mage took a deep breath and said with a trace of admiration. The more contact he had with Dean, in addition to the initial fear and anger, he now had more admiration and awe for Dean. Dean made him deeply understand what it meant by the younger generation will surpass the older. Strong fighting power wasn't terrible. What was terrible was the mind and the ruthlessness. At this time, Dean's breathing gradually stabilized. He stood up and took off his black robe, including his boot. Then a magical flame appeared between his palms. It looked very magical. Like a magician, he burned the black robe and boots in his hands. Then he looked at the black mage and said, "Take off your clothes and eliminate the smell. Get ready to go." The black mage saw Dean's magical flame ability. He couldn't help but think of the scene where Dean shot down the 5 rulers in one breath. His eyelids twitched slightly. It was the first time he had seen such a magical ability. He had never heard of it before. Suddenly, his heart shivered. Dean noticed the change in the black mage's eyes. He said indifferently, "It seems that you have guessed it." The black mage was stunned. "What? My identity?" Dean looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. The black mage's whole body was covered in cold sweat, but his face changed from a dazed to a confused one. "What identity? You don't need to act. Your body has made an honest response." Dean smiled. "Since you have guessed it, then you should know that I can do anything here." The black mage reluctantly smiled. "Elder, you must be joking. Let's go." Dean grabbed the lightning filter and stretched out the split wing on his back. He carried the lightning filter on his back and flew forward. The black mage looked at Dean's back and quickly followed. His heart was filled with other thoughts. The more he thought about it, the more his blood surged. That night, there was a small town on the outer edge of the Phoenix Lord. The town wasn't big. There were only 3 or 4 rich families in it. They had a huge manor. The land in the town was cheap, so several families had built their manors. In terms of land area, they were not inferior to the Bourne family in the Phoenix Lord City. At this moment, in one of the manors, the dim yellow light illuminated the wallpapered hall, making it look somewhat old. A few servants, as well as a few well-dressed women and young men, cowered in the corner of the hall, shivering. The black mage sat on the sofa and let a young maid peel an apple for him. The maid's hand that was holding the knife kept shaking. The apple was almost peeled to the core. "Stupid girl, you're courting death." The black mage was very thirsty. He looked at the apple that was peeled to the size of an orange. He couldn't help but roll his eyes. He raised his hand and was ready to slap the maid. If he really got it, with the maid's physique, her entire jaw would probably be dislocated. Chapter 1032. The Dark Wizard's raised hand paused. He turned around and chuckled. "I was just joking with her. I won't go so far as to bicker with a lowly servant girl. Hitting her would only dirty my hands." The maid shivered in fear and her face turned pale. "Okay, we have to stay in this town for a few days. Don't go too far." Dean was too lazy to waste his time arguing with the black mage. He concentrated on studying the thunder filter. The black mage smiled and nodded. When he turned his face, the corner of his mouth was slightly curled. He thought, "How much better can you be than me? You are a homicidal maniac." He was too lazy to argue with the stupid maid. Although he was dissatisfied with Dean's tone and attitude, he felt that there was some truth in his word. It was indeed ungentlemanly to casually attack the weak. Of course, it was different if he had a purpose. Dean turned on the thunder filter. The flickering electric current sprang out from the metal ring, flashing and jumping. It connected with each other to form a network, making the huge metal ring look like the border of the thunder mirror. He bit off a piece of his nail and threw it into the electric current. The hard nail was hit by the electric current. It floated in the electric net, rolled a few times, and turned into ashes, disappearing. Dean immediately looked at the observation mirror. He saw some light yellow particles appear in the mirror. He adjusted the magnification from 200 times to 500 times. The light yellow particles gradually expanded. These tiny particles contained countless small dots. There were cracks on the surface of these dots, like the lines of a human palm. He continued to magnify the magnification, from 500 times to 1,000 times, and then 1,500 times. The small particles continued to expand and contained new tiny particles. It was very magical. Dean couldn't remember how many times he had adjusted the magnification. When the magnification button next to him reached the bottom, he saw a magical scene in the observation mirror. It was like looking at the Earth from the starry sky. It was a luminous light yellow ball, like a planet suspended in the starry sky, but it did not rotate. Outside it, there were 4 groups of light of different colors rotating, like the moon orbiting the Earth. These 4 groups of small balls were red, blue, gold, and white. The orbit was constant, and the magnetic field between them was very stable. When the magnification was slightly reduced, one could see that these 4 balls of light were surrounding the sphere, and their surface was enveloped by an almost transparent membrane that enveloped them. If one had to use a word to describe it, it would be the universe and the starry sky. Dean was stunned by the spectacle. He almost suspected that there was something wrong with the instrument if he didn't see the beautiful scenery step by step. It was hard for him to believe that this was the smallest landscape in his fingernail. Of course, it was possible that what the thunder filter saw might not be the smallest. After a long time, Dean slowly retracted the magnification and saw the original light yellow particles. He chose to reset the filter, and the scene in the observation mirror was quickly cleared, leaving only darkness. Dean thought for a moment. He used his fingernails to dig out a bit of fruit from the table and threw it into the lightning net. The fruit was quickly crushed. Dean looked through the mirror and saw a bubble-like ball. It was the nutrient content of the fruit. He kept zooming in and finally saw a connected ball of different colors. It seems that I have to try it to know what I'm seeing, Dean murmured to himself. He called the black mage who was resting next to him and asked him to help move the thunder filter to the main room. Then he cleaned out the bookcases and desks in the main room and stuffed them into the bedroom next to the main room. He wanted to make room in the hall so that people wouldn't notice the abnormality here. I'll leave these people to you. Don't leak the news, Dean told the black mage. The black mage smiled and said, "Leave it to me." Dean closed the door and studied the thunder filter in the main room. After a few days, Dean had completely mastered the thunder filter after trying a variety of different samples. During this period, he had decomposed the samples including paper, tables, plastic shells of lamps, blankets, animal skins, and so on. He even found the blood of the black mage, the other maids in the manor, the owner of the manor and his children's blood, flesh, and so on. Through the observation of the thunder filter, Dean found an amazing phenomenon. His own blood composition was completely different from other people's blood composition. When his blood was expanded to the extreme, the scene he saw was almost the same as the scene he saw on the first day when he decomposed the nails. A big ball was surrounded by 4 small balls, like satellites orbiting in an unchanging orbit. The 4 small balls were also red, blue, gold, and white in color. But the ball around them had changed from light yellow to blood red. It was probably because the sample was taken from blood. Dean tested the blood of different parts of the body. He also tried his hair, and found that there were 4 small spheres surrounding it. But the spheres that were surrounded by the 4 spheres had turned black. When it was shrunk, the big sphere and the 4 smaller spheres were all wrapped by a translucent membrane. They looked like a whole sphere, and blurry traces of 4 colors could be seen from the outside of the membrane. However, when it was shrunk even further, this membrane ball was surrounded by countless membrane balls, and on the outside of all the membrane balls, there was actually another membrane that enveloped all the membrane balls inside. And as it continued to shrink, the large membrane ball that enveloped the countless membrane balls was also enveloped by an even larger membrane. His blood and flesh samples were all the same, and he even intended to dissect his bones to observe. Logically speaking, different parts of his body should have different compositions. However, his body could no longer be measured by the body of a normal human. After all, his body had been implanted with magic marks and had been deeply transformed by them. In addition, he had also been experimented on by Crimson Moon. In a sense, he was no longer human. Comparing his own situation, Dean found that the final landscape of the Black Mage's blood was similar to the final landscape of the blood of the maids in the manor. The Black Mage's blood was two balls of the same size around each other, like a yin and yang fish, but the two balls were surrounded by a shining ring of stars. The maids were also two balls of the same size, but there was no ring around them. I don't know how to define this for humans. Is it a cell or a gene? Or something deeper or something else? Dean had a toothache. This was his biggest headache. There was no basis for measurement. Although he could observe the smallest composition of the material, he did not know what it represented or how to define it. Time flew by. Dean stayed in the manor for a month. During this month, many people from the town came to the manor to find the family, but they were all sent away by the manor owner. Among them, there were also his men who came to report the income and expenditure of the financial report, but they were also pushed back. With the Black Mage beside him, the family did not dare to move in the slightest. They did not even have the opportunity to sneak a glance at Dean. Dean was bored in the main room. He had changed from the initial use of the lightning filter to observe the material to the combination of different materials. Then he used the lightning filter to observe the changes of these materials, so as to infer the general characteristics. As the observation deepened, he found something incredible. He felt that the final landscape seen by the lightning filter was not the real final landscape of his body. There should be a more wonderful landscape inside the big ball. However, it was impossible to see it with the lightning filter. In addition, by comparing the genes of the masters like the Black Mage and the ordinary humans like the maids in the manor, he found that his body had many characteristics that their bodies did not have. First of all, the healing ability was fast. In the case of the most basic structure of the magnetic field, even if his body was cut open, it would quickly heal. The strong magnetic field would quickly gather the separated materials and restore them. Under the same experiment, the Black Mage's healing ability was significantly weaker. He only needed more than a minute to recover, but the Black Mage needed nearly half an hour, and the maids needed a day or even 2 days. In addition, Dean also found that when other materials were mixed into his blood, the final landscape was that the big ball around the big ball was still maintaining a constant trajectory. When other materials invaded and encountered the big ball, they were immediately destroyed and smashed, like hitting a train. The broken fragments were integrated into the big ball. But strangely, the big ball did not grow in size after absorbing other materials, and there was no change. When he kept mixing other materials, after a certain amount, he found that there seemed to be a faint shadow of a star ring on the big ball around the big ball. Especially when he mixed in the blood of the parasitic soul worm, the final landscape of the parasitic soul worm's blood was not two balls like the human blood, but a sharp blue awl like an icicle. When the icicle approached the big ball and the big ball, it was immediately smashed by the four-color ball along the trajectory. After the broken icicle fragments were absorbed into the big ball, the shadow of the star ring around the four-color ball on the surface became more clear. After repeated attempts, Dean finally made two amazing discoveries. The first was that the big ball in the final landscape formed by his body was attractive. He discovered that every time he smashed something, it would be sucked over instead of falling naturally. It didn't disperse either. This sphere had a devouring nature like a tiny black hole in the human body. And in every drop of blood in his body, there were countless of such tiny black holes. In addition to the devouring nature, he also found that the blood of the parasitic soul worm could promote the birth of the mysterious star ring. However, when he experimented with the Black Mage's blood, he found something different. When the two balls and the star ring outside the Black Mage's body hit the icicle of the parasitic soul worm, they were both injured. The icicle was broken, and the star ring and the two balls were also broken. They separated from each other and did not attract each other. There seemed to be some kind of repulsion between them. It seems that my body is still very different from ordinary people. I don't know if the abyss is like this, or if it's because I have the origami gene in my body. Dean was thoughtful. Through these days of experiments, he opened his eyes, and repeated experiments also made him have an incredible conjecture, which was his own potential. After repeated experiments, he found that the star ring outside the final landscape seemed to be the power of the magic mark. After repeated arguments, he was basically convinced of this point. The black mage only had one star ring, which meant that he only had one kind of magic mark. His final landscape was a big ball and 4 small balls of different colors. After absorbing the blood of the parasitic soul worm, a star ring appeared outside the 4 small balls. For every kind of parasitic soul worm that was absorbed, a star ring appeared outside the small ball. For this reason, he had to let the black mage go back and forth from the town, sneak into the black shop in the city, and buy a lot of different low-level parasitic soul worms. Fortunately, he only used it for experiments, so his requirements were not high. He did not need rare or legendary level parasitic soul worms, even ordinary parasitic soul worms would be fine. It was not difficult for the black mage to buy them, and he could even buy them in batches. After absorbing 4 different parasitic soul worms, the 4 balls were surrounded by star rings. When Dean continued to try the 5th kind, he was shocked to find that one of the 4 balls had a star ring. The 2 star rings circled around it, looking even more gorgeous. Dean found that there was no limit to the number of star rings that could be added to the 4-color ball. After adding more than 30 different kinds of parasitic soul worms, the number of star rings was still increasing. There were as many as 8 or 9 star rings on each of the 4 balls, almost covering the original light of the 4 balls. This was only a part of the blood experiment, but the experiment was successful. Dean could not help but think that his body could also be like this? Unlimited absorption, unlimited evolution? This idea was a bit bold, even appalling, but the experiment in front of him made Dean think so. The result was too shocking, and at the same time, it brought great excitement. If it was really possible, he could not imagine what kind of terrible power a person who could absorb 2, 3, 4, or even more magic marks would have. If it is successful, maybe I will really be a god. Dean thought of Crimson Moon's pursuit. Could it be that her experiment was successful on him? If that was the case, wouldn't his body already be considered the body of a god? In any case, Dean felt that it was necessary to give it a try. Anyway, his current situation could not be worse. Moreover, the repeated experiments with the thunder filter for more than a month had increased his confidence a lot. A week later, Dean left the town with the black mage and moved the thunder filter away. After finding a cheap house in a remote place, Dean contacted Barton and the others and asked them to watch over the thunder filter. Barton and the others had gradually mixed into various circles on the giant wall of Polga. Many of them had a legitimate identity, but there were still a small number of people who had not been registered yet, and they could help him watch over the thunder filter. Chapter 1033. The legendary monster ranking is easy. I'll give you a monster encyclopedia of the Monster Research Institute. However, there are places that sell legendary parasitic soul worms, but with our funds, even if we sell them, I don't think we can compete with others. The black mage was about to drink the coffee but slowly put it back on the table after hearing Dean's word. Dean glanced at him. How did you get the legendary parasitic soul worm? The black mage smiled. I bought it with the money I saved over the years. Since I became the master, I invested all my funds into the experiment. I don't have much savings. It's not that I'm reluctant to give it to you. Even the born families is not enough? Dean narrowed his eyes. The black mage hesitated. It's enough. But the born family's assets are fixed asset. If we want to liquidate them as soon as possible, it will be too much of a loss. Moreover, the Bourne family is a big family. If we suddenly sell a lot of their assets, it will certainly attract the attention of other families. If they investigate us, then we will be exposed. Is this the reason why you didn't make a move on the Bourne family? Dean thought for a moment and got up. Let me see the illustrated book of monsters first. The black mage quickly got up and followed. After returning to the hotel, the black magician went to the nearby Magic Research Institute to buy an illustrated handbook of the monsters. The illustrated handbook looked like a magazine, but the paper was smooth. It was a high-quality coated paper. The surface of the handbook was equipped with a color picture taken by a camera. It wasn't like the sketches in Sylvia's giant wall. The first thing that caught his eye was the list of monsters. Legendary, rare, uncommon, and normal. Legendary had the least number of monsters, but it still had 47 types of legendary monsters. The first legendary monster was called Gilgamesh. It did not have the word swordsman, which was unique to monsters that were given names. It was an ancient legendary monster, and its introduction was also at the very beginning of the list. It was actually a 5-star legendary monster. Gilgamesh, 5-star legend. It is reported that there are only 3 Gilgamesh in the world. One of them was captured and exploded before dying, leaving no parasitic soul worm. The whereabouts of the other 2 are still unknown. Dean's eyelids twitched as he looked at the information above. This legendary monster, Gilgamesh, had never been captured. Didn't this mean that no one had its parasitic soul worm? Black Magician saw Dean turn to this page, smiled slightly, and said with emotion, "This legendary monster is not only the number 1 in our giant wall illustrated handbook of legendary monsters, I heard that even in the Empire, it is ranked in the top 5 of the 5-star legendary monsters. It is very rare. Since ancient times, no one has ever obtained its parasitic soul worm, including those big shots in the Empire. What a pity. Dean didn't expect him to know something about the Empire. He couldn't help but look at him. Then he thought that the giant wall was different from Sylvia. It had a close relationship with the Empire. It was assigned by the Empire to look after the Devil's Pit. It was normal for the residents here to have more contact and understanding about the Empire than the residents of Sylvia. His eyes fell on the blurred picture below. It was a picture taken by a camera, but maybe the focus was not right, so it was a bit blurry. Generally speaking, it was in a vast forest. A huge monster with a humanoid body was walking in the forest. Its arms were extremely long, almost reaching its knees. There were sharp blades on its arms, as well as vine tentacles. The monster's head was like a tree branch with its leaves cut off. It had irregular sharp horns. Its whole body had a silver-white streamlined body. It was very strange. The most eye-catching thing was that it had 4 huge wings on its back. They were like erect black blades. Dean looked carefully and found that the forest under its feet was only up to its knees. It must be known that most of the trees in this world had already grown crazily under the influence of nuclear radiation. Especially in the forest, the trees were generally 20 to 30 meters high. If it was according to this ratio, wouldn't Gilgamesh be more than 150 meters high? Dean's pupils shrank. He felt an inexplicable shiver. This wasn't a storybook but reality. A monster with a height of more than 150 meters was living in the same world as him. They were only separated by a giant wall. Just thinking about it made him shudder. It wasn't a problem to stop the average monster with the height of the giant wall. But in front of a monster like Gilgamesh, wasn't it just a matter of jumping? Dean couldn't imagine that such a huge creature could grow on the earth. It wasn't expansion but rampage. The sense of crisis was very strong. But soon Dean calmed down. There was an ancient Chinese saying that if the sky collapsed, there would be a tall one to support it. If such a monster appeared in front of the giant wall, the weak civilians and the tall ones would be the most unlucky ones. Freemen like them could leave at any time. Resistance, 7 stars. speed increase, 7 stars, physique increase, 7 stars. Dean saw the following introduction, but it was marked as experimental speculation. The data was detected from Gilgamesh's severed limbs. It was the first time for Dean to see a 7-star evaluation. The highest he had seen before was only 5 stars. He thought that 5 stars was the limit. It seemed that the power contained in Gilgamesh was beyond the concept of ordinary legendary monsters. The basic increase in all aspects was estimated to be comparable to the increase in speed of low-level legendary monsters. The second legendary monster was called Leo. It was also an ancient legendary monster. From the name, it could be seen that this was a monster that controlled lightning. Its body contained extremely terrifying electricity. It fed on lightning and thunderbirds. Some people said that it was the king of thunderbirds, but others said that it was the nemesis of thunderbirds, or even the bane of thunderbirds. However, it was also because of its simple living habits that it was easy to be captured. As long as thunder or thunderbirds were used as bait, it would be easy to lure it. Although it was strong, humans had always been used to defeating the strong with the weak. This was the unchanging ability of humans in all things on Earth. Leo was also a 5-star legendary monster. The basic increase in all aspects was 5 stars. Leo's magic mark had the ability to control electric current and was immune to all electric shock. Dean saw that it was immune to all lightning. He knew that this statement was not rigorous enough. Even if the body cells transformed by Leo's magic mark could accommodate lightning, there was a limit. Even Leo itself couldn't bear all lightning. After all, lightning was the same as flames, there was no upper limit to its power. Dean continued to turn down the list. 4-star legendary monsters. From Gilgamesh to the third legendary monster, the difference in ability and rarity was dozens of times. It was almost a fault-like decline. The black magician noticed Dean's look and guessed his thoughts. He explained, "This Gilgamesh is a famous legendary monster in the entire empire. If it hadn't appeared in our area, it wouldn't have been recorded in our giant wall illustrated book. This Leo is our local legendary monster. More than 200 years ago, the third giant wall lord hunted a young Leo and inherited its magic mark. Later he was transferred away. I heard that he went to the empire to become a high-ranking official. This made his descendants not only live a happy life, but also brought the advanced technology of the empire to our giant wall. I know, each illustrated book only records the legendary monsters that have appeared in the giant wall territory." Dean indifferently responded. He estimated that the real list of legendary monsters could only be seen in the empire. In the giant wall of Sylvia, there was only one 5-star legendary monster, Dream Breeder. Moreover, it had appeared before, but no Sylvian had ever obtained the magic mark of Dream Breeder. After finishing the legendary book, Dean continued to read the rare book. There were 271 kinds of rare monsters. It was a rich variety. Dread? Dean saw a familiar name. He didn't expect that there would be Dread in the giant wall. It was one of the top 10 rare monsters in Sylvia, but here it was ranked 42nd. The past slowly poured into his mind. Dean was silent for a moment, then slowly recovered. He tidied up his mood and continued to read. 2 hours later, the thick monster illustrated handbook was completely flipped by Dean. "These are the parasitic soul worms of these 7 monsters. Help me see where I can get them." Dean handed the 8 names of the monsters to the Black Mage. The Black Mage realized why Dean wrote down these names. He glanced at the book and saw that there were no legendary monsters. He was relieved. But thinking that these 8 were rare monsters, he suddenly felt a headache. These rare soul worms can be bought in black shops and underground markets. You can also buy them at a high price in the Magic Research Institute. But the price of these 8 rare soul worms is not less than a legendary soul worm. Although legendary soul worms are hard to come by, but rare soul worms are usually priceless. Even if I have the money to buy them, I can't find these 8 rare soul worms for sale in a short time. How can there be such a coincidence? Unless we go to the Magic Research Institute to buy them. They supply them all year round, but the price is half the price of a legendary soul worm. Then let's go to the Magic Research Institute to buy one first, Dean said. The black mage slightly opened his mouth. He couldn't wait to slap himself. Which one do you want to buy first? The black mage felt that his heart was bleeding. Dean took a look and chose a rare monster called Tortoise. This monster was good at defense and hiding. Both abilities were excellent. Generally, when a tortoise encountered a monster stronger than itself, it would turn its whole body into a rock. It could not only enhance its defense but also hide its aura. At the same time, it could also turn into a rock for ambush and sneak attack other monsters. The black mage's eyelids twitched. I know. I'll go and ask if there are any. I'll wait for you outside. Dean patted the black mage's shoulder. The black mage smiled in his heart. It was clear that Dean was afraid that he would deliberately say no and deliberately eavesdrop. The black mage disguised himself and entered the Magic Research Institute. It didn't take long for him to come out. He looked at Dean. Our luck is good. There is one. I have paid the deposit and it is being dispatched from the headquarters. It will arrive tomorrow. Dean nodded. He had already heard the exchange. Let's go back. The next day, the turtle-shell's soul worm was retrieved from the Magic Research Institute. Dean took the black mage to the remote manor where the lightning filter was stored. He took a drop of the turtle's soul worm's blood and put it into the lightning filter. He was relieved when he saw that the final landscape of the blood was like an icicle. Although he hadn't used the lightning filter to see the cloned soul worm in the temple of the Cargel giant wall. But he expected that the soul worm had combined with the origami factor. The final landscape would be different. The deified soul worm was a pit. Once it was used up, it would be hopeless to turn into an abyss. It seems that the Magic Research Institute has cultivated a lot of soul worms. It shouldn't be a simple coincidence. Dean was curious whether the Magic Research Institute had mastered the breeding method of soul worms, but it was useless for him. Even if he had a way, he expected that the materials and resources needed were not trivial. It was a big deal. He had no fixed residence, so he couldn't manage it. For him, the most important thing was still power. With power came status and everything else. After all, since the ancient times, only power could lead to the highest level. It was just like in the olden era. For those who worked for a living, education was the best stepping stone. But for the society, money was the hardest skill. Even if you were a waste, you could be supported by the people with money. For those countries, the strongest weapon was nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons had the capital to negotiate. Otherwise, no matter how good the country's culture and economy was, it was just a fat pig that could be slaughtered at any time. I can't kill you, but it will make you stronger. If I don't die, then the heart will be able to withstand my squandering. 7 kings of the empire, wait for me. Dean's eyes flashed. The most efficient way to find Aisha was to become one of the 7 kings and gather all the power of the giant wall to search the entire territory of the empire. In any case, Aisha was in this territory. Dean took a deep breath and cut a small slit on the body of the tortoise soul worm. It looked a bit like a cockroach, but its body was grayish-white. At this moment, cold, light black blood dripped from its body and fell into the wound on his palm. Absorb it and prove that my guess is right. Dean silently closed his eyes and prayed in his heart. Chapter 1034. Dean quickly cut the wound, took out the blood from inside and put it into the thunderbolt filter for analysis. Soon he found that the final landscape in the blood had changed. The blue ball was surrounded by a faint ring of stars. Did this mean that he had mastered the power of magic marks? Dean was happy and looking forward to it. He moved his fingers and stimulated the power of the magic marks like in the past. He injected his blood into his fingers and tightened the meridians between his fingers. His fingers turned into a white stone palm in the blink of an eye. It was really done. Dean was so excited that he almost jumped up. He hadn't been so excited for a long time. The experiment was confirmed, so his conjecture was correct. His body could accommodate a variety of magic marks. After the excitement, Dean quickly thought of the magic marks of the splitter. He immediately stimulated the splitter's magic mark. There was no hindrance as a sharp thorn extended from his back. He tried to use the splitter's magic marks on his palm. A strange scene appeared. His arm turned into a stone splitter. It looked like a stone scythe. The overlapping of magic marks. Dean's eyes widened as he looked at the petrified arm incredulously. He felt that his whole body was about to be petrified. It was incredible. The first thing he thought of was the terrifying possibility of this result. After a long time, Dean slowly recovered. It was still difficult for him to adapt and accept such a reality. He suddenly felt like he was dreaming. It felt like he had suddenly gained the power of God from an ordinary person. Yes, although his previous physique was not weak and very strong, it was only at the first-class level. There was still a huge gap between him and the top existences like the Seven Kings, and it was difficult to make up for it. After all, the rarity of the Ice Worm King might be even rarer than a 5-star legendary monster like Gilgamesh. However, at this moment, the petrified arm brought him great hope and infinite possibilities. The overlapping of magic marks and the multiple absorption of magic marks' abilities. This meant that Burrow's conjecture was confirmed. His ideal god was created by Crimson Moon, gathering the abilities of a large number of magic marks, superimposing the magic marks' abilities, and reaching the top in all aspects. There were no shortcomings, no flaws. This was almost the template of the ideal, perfect creature. Perhaps the end of evolution was like this. Is this what it means to be happy after suffering? The God creation experiment actually succeeded. Dean touched the petrified blade, feeling a little unreal. He was suddenly glad that Crimson Moon had abandoned him. If she knew that her experiment was not wrong, he would have become her #1 fighter at this moment. However, Dean suddenly remembered that Crimson Moon abandoned him because of the failure of the experiment. He thought of the heart formed in his chest and suddenly felt that he was still one step away from being a perfect creature. At least, his heart was not perfect. This was his only flaw. Perhaps, he could only be considered a defective product of God. A defective product of God, should it be called a demon? Dean muttered to himself with a wry smile. The excitement in his heart gradually subsided. If Crimson Moon's theory was correct, with his current body, even if it was a defective product, it had the potential to surpass the Seven Kings. Moreover, he did not need the Arctic Insect King to evolve to the point of surpassing the Seven Kings. After all, relying on the Arctic Insect King would eventually be affected by the Insect King. That was not the purpose of Burrow's God creation experiment. Crimson Moon's experiment is still ongoing. I don't know if she will create a real god. Perhaps a new era will come, an era of gods, and humans will be ruled by gods. Dean looked at the flashing lightning in front of him, a little lost in thought. His association was not impossible. Although this was still far from the problem he was facing right now, Confucius was right. If you don't think far ahead, you will have immediate worries. The difference between ordinary people and rich people in this world was that ordinary people mostly considered the current life, while businessmen knew how to see the changes of the times, prepare for a rainy day, and pave the way in advance. Dean had to think in advance. If Crimson Moon created a large number of gods, what would happen to the world's structure, and how would he survive in this change? As he thought about it, his thoughts seemed to drift thousands of miles away. He stood there blankly for the whole afternoon until the Black Mage knocked on the door and delivered dinner. Dean came back to his senses and suddenly noticed that the soul worm of the tortoiseshell, which had been scratched for blood, was dying. He immediately asked the black mage to put down the dinner and drive it out. Then he absorbed the whole soul worm of the tortoiseshell into his body. After a short itch, his body gradually calmed down. Dean tested it and sure enough, he could enter the magic mark of the tortoiseshell state. His whole body petrified, coiled up like a rock, and no smell was emitted. After dinner, they rested for the night. The next day, Dean secretly returned to Burn Manor with the black mage. When he returned to the basement of the manor, he listened to the guard's report. He learned that the plump woman who had been tortured by the black magician had died on the operating table. After they left, although the guards provided the prisoners with food and drink, the transplanted tissue in the plump woman's body mutated. Pustules appeared all over her body, and strange worms like centipedes hatched from the pustules. The worms bit the woman to death. The guards were also scared to death by the hellish scene. They took a few photos with their cameras and kept them. Dean glanced at the photos and frowned. Even with his psychological endurance, he felt a burst of discomfort. Although he did not look in the mirror, he felt that his face had become tense. The black mage saw the photos, but covered his mouth and vomited at the side. His face was extremely ugly. After he finished vomiting, Dean asked the black mage to dispose of all the prisoners here. It was impossible to repatriate and release the prisoners. These prisoners would be exposed here, so he could only give them a comfortable euthanasia. Although it was very cruel, for Dean, life was not equal. In the case that he did not need to face it directly, people for him might be just a word, and the number of casualties was just a number. Only when he saw the tragedy of death, perhaps he would be touched by the physiological reaction and produce discomfort. But if he did not directly face the blood, even if the things done were very cruel, he would not feel it. Perhaps everyone was like this. After sending away the group of people, Dean told the black mage to prepare to slowly sell the Byrne family's property to raise money as soon as possible. Chapter 1035. The other slave, Peter, accompanied the black magician to help Dean sell the Bourne family's property. Dean spent most of his time in the major libraries of Phoenix City. He read all kinds of books and quickly learned about the situation of the giant wall of Balga. He also learned a lot about the Empire and the secrets of the Devil's Pit from these books. As he guessed, the Devil's Pit was the location where the nuclear weapons from the old era fell. No wonder the nuclear radiation in the Devil's Pit was so strong. It was dozens of times stronger than the outside world. Moreover, the exploration team sent by the giant wall found a lot of strange things in the Devil's Pit. From the black and white photos, it was clear that there were all kinds of broken spaceships. Some were cracked barrels, some were rudders of the spaceships, and some were broken spaceships. The nuclear weapons didn't destroy the insects but changed the Earth beyond recognition. Dean sighed. He felt sad. The world created by nuclear weapons would eventually be retaliated on the heads of humans. However, it wasn't difficult to see that the Devil's Pit was the main location where the spaceships appeared. Perhaps the reason why the nuclear weapons fell here was to attack the headquarters of the insect. Unfortunately, he was not the only one who could see this. It was estimated that all the demonic pits in the Empire had been plundered countless times by the Seven Kings. They even deliberately let the giant wall of Porgia stand guard. Their purpose was obviously not as simple as detecting the changes in the demonic energy radiation in the demonic pit. Dean wasn't interested in going to the Devil's Pit. Instead, he thought about the spaceship in the ice dragon's nest. There were a lot of ice insects and the suspected ice insect king. Although his body didn't need them to evolve and become stronger, but he could take them and give them to Noise to improve their strength. However, he didn't plan to go there for the time being. The suspected ice insect king had left a big shadow in his heart. Moreover, Noise and Barton hadn't established a foothold in the giant wall yet. Moreover, He had many experimental ideas that he hadn't had time to verify with the lightning filter. The theft of the lightning filter didn't cause much of a stir in the Nile territory. The main reason was that this thing was a wizard's artifact and couldn't see the light of day. Moreover, the assassin of Brank didn't leave any clues. Even the professional deacon of the magistrate couldn't find any useful clues. They could only continue to track in the dark. However, the theft of the thunder filter had caused quite a commotion among the wizard. Rumors spread like wildfire, and there were all sorts of speculations. Many wizards even declared that they would find the culprit and avenge Brank. More magi were secretly paying attention to relevant news, hoping to obtain the lightning filter. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. Time passed quickly. Noyce, Barton, Macon and others had taken root in the giant wall of Berga. They had their own identity. Some were lawyers, some were musicians, some were admitted to the Knights' Hall, and some were mixed into the magistrate as apprentice knight. Everyone was like a big net. Under the intentional arrangement of Noyce, they were scattered into various circles of the giant wall. In the past 6 months, Dean's harvest was the greatest. Relying on the characteristics of his own genes, he successfully absorbed 5 soul worms. Coupled with his own abilities of Splitter and Sun Beast soul worm, it was equivalent to having the abilities of 7 soul worms. Among the 5 newly added soul worms, other than the first tortoiseshell, which was a rare magical creature, the other 4 were all legendaries. One of the 4 legendary soul worms was bought from the Born family. The other 3 didn't come from soul worms, but from human beings. This was also one of Dean's biggest gains. When the pioneers of the Born family and the ruler, who cooperated with the Black Magician to divide the Born and Barrett industries, rebelled, he killed them. Originally, he planned to use their bodies for research, but then he suddenly thought that the magic marks contained in their bodies could be absorbed into his own body. As a result of the experiment, he found that it was really possible. This broke Dean's original inherent thinking. Later, after various attempts, he found that he could not only absorb ability fragments from the body of the soul worm, but also devour other creatures to absorb the characteristics of the creature. For example, directly devouring a bloodthirsty leech, his body would have the blood-sucking ability of the bloodthirsty leech, and he could rely on blood to replenish his own consumption. But this kind of direct absorption had a flaw. The appearance of the genes would change accordingly. After absorbing the genes of a wolf, a portion of the sample flesh he used for his experiments grew thick fur on the surface of the flesh. He suspected that if his body directly absorbed the genes, he would also experience a partial transformation. In fact, the more genes he absorbed, the more parts of his body would mutate, and in the end, he would turn into a form that he didn't even dare to imagine. In contrast, soul worms seemed to be a filter. Dean already understood a little. The worms that he saw in the Earth Dragon Cave in Amelie's tribe were primitive soul worms that didn't parasitize any creatures. These soul worms were produced from ice worms, but not all soul worms could grow into ice worms. It seemed that the environment didn't allow it, or there was a lack of something. Although they were born from the mother, they couldn't become ice worms. But soul worms had a characteristic that ice worms didn't have. That was parasitizing other creatures and relying on other creatures to survive. While parasitizing, the soul worm would absorb the organism's genes and copy them into its own body. When it parasitized another organism, it would copy the genetic abilities in its body to the new parasite and slowly transform the new parasite's body. This was like moving to a new place, but it was still very nostalgic about its original home, so it would also decorate the new home to look like its original home. Of course, for these soul worms, it might not be because of nostalgia, but because of adaptation. If he directly absorbed the gene chain copied from these soul worms, Dean's body could be controlled within the scope of the original, and there wouldn't be too much change on the surface. It was like discarding some rough things and only extracting the core genes inside. However, through the observation of the thunder filter, Dean found that the negative effect of directly absorbing from other magic marks was smaller than absorbing from soul worms. It was like the magic mark ability was the second filter. After continuously absorbing the abilities of 5 different magic marks, Dean found that the final landscape of his cells was surrounded by illusory star rings on the surface of the 4 color balls, and among them, the blue ball was surrounded by 2. Chapter 1036. In a manor in a small town on the outskirts of the Phoenix territory, the spacious hall was filled with people. Each of them had a different temperament, but most of them were not people to be trifled with. Dean sat on the sofa in the middle of the room. His handsome face had a scholarly aura. He looked around and saw that Noyce, Sergei and others had arrived. It's not a big deal. I'm going to leave in the near future to find something. I'll be back in a few months. You don't have to worry about it. Continue to lurk according to the original plan. Everyone looked at each other with some doubts and reluctance. They knew that Dean would not change his decision for them. Noyce's heart sank as he heard Dean's words. Although he expected such a day, but he didn't expect it to come so soon. He bit his teeth. Master, I want to go with you. Me too. Macon next to him quickly said. I'll go too. Aurora also quickly raised her hand. Teacher, me too. Edward hurriedly called out. There's still us. I want to go too. The others did not want to be left behind and quickly expressed their opinions. Dean raised his hand to suppress the noise. He looked at the sadness in Noyce's eyes. It's not like I won't come back. You will only hinder me if you follow me. Noyce, I'll need you to take care of this place while I'm gone. If there's any trouble, you'll be punished. Don't say that I didn't remind you. Noyce was startled as he saw Dean's warm eyes. He felt that he was mistaken. He couldn't help but ask, Master, will you really come back? Of course. Dean smiled. My body is recovering well, so there shouldn't be any problems. You don't have to worry about me. Instead, you have to take care of yourselves while I'm away. It's best to treat this place as your nest, or even your future home. Perhaps in the future, we will have the opportunity to move to the Giant Wall Empire. However, the environment there is more complex and dangerous than here. I hope you can adapt to this place in advance and live well. Take this as an experience. Young Master, are you really planning to go to the Divine Kingdom? Barton asked in surprise. That will depend on the future situation and your performance. Dean clapped his hands. He didn't want to talk about the future plans. Let them rest first. I have something to tell you. Noyce, Barton, Macon and others understood and let their confidants retreat. If it's possible, find out the situation of the 8 lords in this period of time, especially the Wall Lord and the mysterious leader of the sorcerers, the Sorcerer King. Dean looked at Noyce. But don't be too hasty. Don't let them uproot you. Wait for me to come back and deal with any news. I understand, young master. Noyce nodded. I'll leave Peter and the Dark Wizard to you. Although they are stronger than you, but they can't see the light of day. Deal with them and use them as much as possible. Dean said to Noyce. Yes, young master, Noyce said seriously. Sergei said, Young master, those 2 are lords. We are still in the inner wilderness. What if they don't listen to us? Isn't it too dangerous? Noyce didn't wait for Dean to speak as he looked at him. Use your brain. We have their weakness in our hands and the young master is behind us. They won't dare to go against us. Don't forget how the young master dealt with the enemies who were stronger than the young master. Sergei scratched his head. But the young master is the young master and we are us. Can we deal with them? Noyce rolled his eyes. Do you think I'm following the young master for nothing? Dean smiled and looked at his pocket watch. He saw that the curfew time was coming. He asked Noyce to dismiss his confidants and let them return to the city ahead of time. On the second day, when Dean was ready to leave Balga, a huge airship suddenly appeared outside the giant wall. The bright silver hull reflected the sunlight like a rainbow arc. The ship, the sails, and the hull were exactly the same as the ship. The only difference was that the bottom of the ship was ejecting red and blue flames like a rocket. Behind the airship was a rain of locusts. When they got closer, they could see that it was an air-jet airship. This airship was relatively small and could carry no more than 5 people. But the number of airships was very large. They were all over the giant wall, surrounding the airship that was the size of an aircraft carrier. It looked extremely spectacular, like a dream. Dean had just backed up the purified water needed in the wilderness. As soon as he opened the window, he saw the shocking scene. He felt like he was watching a science fiction movie. Moreover, it was an interstellar war. What's the situation? Dean was confused. The residents who got up early in the giant wall also saw this spectacular spectacle. In front of the windows and on the road, the residents all looked up with a blank face. Dean used his binoculars to see the strange pattern engraved on the hull of the huge airship. It was a blood-red twisted vine. It was the emblem symbol. Seeing this symbol, he heaved a sigh of relief. He had seen this symbol before. It represented one of the 7 kings of the empire, the Blood-Thorn King. He had learned about it from Felicia. Later, when the Blood-Thorn King went to besiege Burrow, he had also seen his appearance and the symbol on his armor. I thought it was an alien invasion. Dean slightly curled his lips. His eyes swept over the huge spaceship and the many airships next to it. The golden light flashed in his eyes. Soon he saw the internal structure of the spaceship and the airship. He found something strange. The internal energy of the spaceship didn't rely on aviation gasoline, but a huge crystal. The crystal was like a battery. It was connected to a dense network. A steady stream of special energy was transmitted from the crystal to the propeller of the airship. The energy would turn into a flame and propel the airship. In addition, the airship didn't only rely on the flame to propel it. There were many rows of vents under the hull. It was like an air conditioner. The gap between the vents would produce a strong wind to support the airship. Moreover, the exhaust was active. It could adjust the angle and control the direction. Is this the technology of the Empire? Dean slightly narrowed his eyes. The energy output of the crystal was as transparent as a crystal. However, the crystal would never be converted into such a strong energy. This technology was ahead of the old era. The speed of the airship slowed down. It slowly approached the center of the giant wall. The surrounding airships were scattered like locusts. They gradually gathered together like a big net. Dean frowned as he saw the trajectory of the spaceship. It seemed that the spaceship was going to stop at the giant wall. Was there something terrifying in the 6th devil pit that was guarded by the giant wall? Did it come to crusade against it? Dean was lost in thought. He was not only thinking about the purpose of the airship but also the information brought by the airship. It was the technology of the Empire. He didn't know how advanced the technology of the Empire was. However, he knew that the electric light had appeared on the giant wall as early as 150 years ago. It must be known that the total time for people in the old era to use electric light was less than 150 years ago. In other words, the civilization level of the Empire was not inferior to the old era. Moreover, if the electric light came from the Empire, then who knows how many years it took for the Empire to introduce it to the giant wall. Just like Sylvia, who didn't learn to use electricity for more than 300 years. If the giant wall didn't have the task of guarding the 6th devil pit, then perhaps the fate of the giant wall wouldn't be far from Sylvia's. He suddenly thought that the Empire was deliberately suppressing the technology inside the giant wall. Just like how the nobles in the inner wall monopolized the technology. Was the purpose of this just stupid greed and selfishness? It must be known that the life of the Empire wasn't easy. They had to resist the invasion of foreign races at the border. They also had to maintain the harmony of the abyss inside the wall. They also had to eliminate the terrifying existence that might be born in the devil pit. All of these were enough to bring a sense of crisis to the empire. However, suppressing the technology inside the giant wall was like cutting off one's own arms. Dean couldn't figure it out. He had read a lot of secret information when he ruled Sylvia, but there was no record of this. He felt that there must be a reason that he hadn't thought of yet. What was the reason that the Empire had to suppress the technology inside the giant wall when they were thirsty for power? He thought hard for a moment but still couldn't figure it out. He found that his thoughts were diverted. He didn't know the reason why the Empire suppressed the technology inside the giant wall. But the technology of the Empire was so advanced that it was a pipe dream for him to break into the Empire alone and seize the throne. If the technology of the Empire was similar to that of the giant wall, then he could rely on the knowledge of the old era to manufacture advanced electric weapons, laser weapons and the like to rule the Empire. But now the technology of the Empire had reached the point where he couldn't understand it. His biggest trump card, the knowledge of the old era, was completely useless in the Empire. This meant that if he wanted to be the king of the Empire, then he had to learn the technology of the Empire as soon as possible and then surpass it in the field of science and technology. Or he had to be several times stronger than the average king. He had to be so strong that they wouldn't be able to use the technology to defend themselves. However, Dean knew how terrible the power of technology was. Even the king didn't dare to step out of the earth. But the technology could do it. Even the king who surpassed the king would turn into ashes in front of the nuclear weapons. This was the power of technology. It was something that couldn't be achieved by living things. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but want to smash everything in front of him. He thought that by relying on his current body, it would be easy for him to win the position of the king in the Empire. Then he would use the power of the king to find Aisha. Everything was perfect. But this beautiful idea was suddenly broken. Even if he had the strength to surpass the king, what could he do? The 7 kings wouldn't be stupid enough to fight with him and lose to give up the throne. They wouldn't be stupid enough to know that his strength was enough to be the king. So they would make him the 8th king to separate their own resources and territory. The real result would be that once the 7 kings knew of his existence, they would use various means to attack and destroy him. He wasn't afraid to fight with only his physique. But the Empire was the nest of the 7 kings. They had been dominating for many years. They had mastered the technology that he didn't understand. Even if he wanted to have a fair and square duel, it would be wishful thinking. Originally he felt that he could cross it in one step. But suddenly it became as difficult as ascending to the sky. Dean had the urge to grab the air, but eventually he endured and gradually calmed down. The goal couldn't be changed. So he could only find a way to complete the goal no matter how difficult it was. Dean took a few deep breaths and completely calmed down. He was ready to see what the spaceship was going to do at the giant wall of Balga. At 5:00 in the afternoon, Dean looked at the sky full of airships following the spaceship in the sky. They left the sky and went into the distance until they completely disappeared. Dean immediately looked for Peter and Black Magician to find a way to inquire about the purpose of the spaceship. Both of them were pressured by Dean. They spent a lot of money to carefully inquire about the information from various channels. Finally, they brought back the information and reported it to Dean. I heard that there is a war in the south of the Empire. This spaceship belongs to the 7th Legion under the command of the Blood-Thorn King. They are going to the southern border as reinforcements. It seems that the elder brother of the Wall King is the commander of the 7th Legion. The information that the two of them brought back was more or less the same and could be considered reliable. Dean knew that the information was reliable when he heard them mention the Blood-Thorn King. But the information brought back by Peter surprised Dean. He didn't expect that the elder brother of the Balga giant wall was working for the Blood-Thorn King. It seemed that the giant wall of Balga was also under the jurisdiction of the Blood-Thorn King. Regardless of whether the information was true or false, The war in the south made Dean a little concerned. He remembered that Felicia had said that the Empire was surrounded by enemies on all sides. The Fire Dragon clan from the east, the Troll clan from the south, and the Snow Ape clan from the north. The west side was the best. It faced the sea, so there were few battles. But often when the tide rose, there would be a big mess. Even the wall of God of War could be destroyed. Compared to the turmoil on the other three sides, the west side didn't move. But if there was a problem, it would be a big problem. Chapter 10:37. Although he was curious and wanted to see, Dean didn't plan to follow the footsteps of the Blood-Thorn Legion's spaceship. His original plan was still the same, but he included the southern border into his future itinerary. Dean left the giant wall that night. The full moon hung high in the sky. The sound of frogs croaking and strange hissing in the dark forest outside the giant wall became the eternal music of the world outside the giant wall. Dean carried his backpack and rushed all the way to the east. After midnight, Dean had completely left the area that was reclaimed by the giant wall and came to the abyss. He didn't stop but kept flying at a low altitude and hurried on his way. From time to time, bloody mouths would jump out from the ground to bite him, but he easily dodged them. Sharp blades shot out from his body and sliced through the mouth. Then, his body did not stop at all and flew far away like a puff of smoke. Dean killed 7 or 8 Dominator-level monsters and an Abyss monster that blocked his way. At dawn the next day, he came to a bare hill and sat down to rest. He drank a few mouthfuls of purified water and ate a few pieces of smoked beast meat. The warm feeling caressed his face. Dean faced the morning glow and looked at the vast plain and small forest in front of the hill. He could still see the traces of the old era's road between the weeds of the plain. He suddenly felt a little lonely. In the past, when he was in the abyss, he had Aisha to accompany him. Although he talked all the way, he always had a companion. But this time, he was the only one left. The whole old era was destroyed, and he was the only one left. How could he be happy when he lived to the end? Dazed and missing, Dean sat on the hill, lost in thought. Only after a long time did he come back to his senses. Then, he collected his thoughts and continued on his journey. Half a month later, Dean came to a forest with strong radiation concentration. He stood on a treetop in the forest and looked at the surrounding environment. He muttered to himself, "The ice dragon is dead, but the temperature is still so low. The snow in the forest hasn't melted. Is there a new master?" That's right, the purpose of his trip was to find the demonic insect spaceship in the Arctic frost dragon's lair. Along the way, he met a lot of monsters with ice and snow physique. The body structure of these monsters seemed to be completely different from ordinary monsters. Most of their bodies looked snow-white, and their scales were crystal clear. Their hair was pure white, and the horns on the top of their head were like icicles. Even the blood in their body was white, and there was no heat emitting from their body. Dean felt that it would be very interesting to study these monsters on the experimental bench. In this world, the changes of living things far exceeded the progress of research. When people analyzed the body structure of a type of monster, new monsters and mutated creatures would appear. Life that had never been thoroughly studied since ancient times possessed unimaginable diversity. Different environments and factors would create different life forms. Dean cut off 2 monsters that were waiting for an opportunity to sneak attack him. He came to the end of the forest without any hindrance. The lake where the ice dragon lived was still there. The lake was as smooth and tranquil as a mirror. The spaceship is still there. Dean's eyes penetrated the surface of the lake and saw the depths of the lake. The place where his X-ray ability couldn't reach was now easily extended. In addition to his X-ray ability, he also had the ability to increase the vision range by more than 10 times. It was like having a telescope. It was the icing on the cake for someone who could see very far. However, this was just a small ability that came with the legendary magic mark, just like the X-ray ability of the splitter. The material of the spaceship couldn't penetrate into the lake, but Dean was relieved to see that the spaceship was still there. It meant that Felicia hadn't come here yet. At this time, from the corner of his eyes, he saw a snow-white shadow entrenched on another dark reef rock at the bottom of the lake. A sea python? Dean's eyes penetrated the scales and saw the structure of its body. He quickly retracted his eyes and picked up a boulder from the ground and threw it into the lake. The mirror-like surface of the lake was suddenly broken by the waves. The snow-white sea python at the bottom of the lake suddenly opened its eyes. Its amber-dark golden pupils were emotionless. It raised its head and looked at the place where the boulder fell. Its coiled body was also slowly pulled up and swam up. Soon, Dean saw a shadow that was more than 10 meters long. He flew over and got close to the surface of the lake. The snow-white sea serpent swam under Dean's feet. It seemed to find that Dean was motionless above the lake. It gradually became restless and suddenly jumped out of the lake. Water splashed everywhere, and a bloody mouth full of sharp teeth came toward Dean. Its mouth was big enough to swallow Dean whole. A splitting blade extended from Dean's back. The dark blade fiercely swung, and the ferocious mouth was torn apart. White blood sputtered out like milk, but it was very cold like frozen water when it fell on Dean's body. The body of the white sea serpent fell into the lake and slowly sank. Dean immediately changed place. He took a deep breath and plunged into the lake. He quickly swam toward the spaceship at the bottom of the lake. Soon, he came to the spaceship. He went through the entrance and came to a place inside the spaceship that looked like a water tank. Sticking out his head from the inside, he saw the corridor inside the spaceship. The floor of the corridor was covered with bronze steel pipes. It seemed that the spaceship was the body of a huge creature, and the complex dark cyan steel pipes were its blood vessels and veins. There was no water in the spaceship. The mysterious reason made Dean have no time to think about it. The technology of the magic insect spaceship was far ahead of the Earth. It was beyond his understanding that it could cross the distant galaxy to the Earth. He wrung out the water on his body, and then used the heat brought by the sun beast to dry his clothes. The water evaporated, and then released all the perception of the magic mark. Ultrasonic hearing, X-ray vision, smell, and long-range touch extended from the soles of his feet, so that he could feel the movement under the metal under the soles of his feet. The sound of wind came from the corridor, and there was a very slight friction sound mixed with the wind. There was a slightly sticky feeling. Dean's mind was filled with the picture of the insect gently wriggling with sticky liquid. His eyes were dignified as he slowly walked along the corridor. He didn't know whether his current strength could suppress all the ice insects here, and also the giant insect that was being fed by the ice insect. Along the corridor, Dean saw that there were blood stains on the ground. They had long dried up, and it seemed that there was fresh blood here. After bypassing 2 aisles, a metal door was closed, and the corridor was cut off. Dean was slightly startled. Last time, this door didn't seem to be closed. It's closed here. Are they protecting themselves? Dean raised his hand and touched the door, trying to sense the situation behind the door, but he felt nothing. The range of his long-range touch was only about 4 or 5 meters, which was very limited. But it was a very strong ability in close combat. It was the ability that was drawn from the magic mark of a pioneer. Dean gently scratched the metal door with the splitting blade, but couldn't make a mark. Although it was related to the strength, it was the first time that he encountered something that couldn't be damaged by the splitting blade. The solidity of the spaceship was beyond his imagination. After the surprise, Dean felt that his surprise was a little funny. The magic insect used this spaceship to cross the galaxy, so the solidity was naturally beyond ordinary metal materials. If he could easily cut it, it would be abnormal. Since this road was blocked, he could only find another way. Dean was about to go back along the original road. Suddenly, he saw a raised ball by the door, flashing red light like a camera. He leaned over and looked at it. He was suspicious. This thing could emit light. Didn't it mean that this spaceship still had energy? While he was thinking, suddenly there was a click. Dean was so scared that his expression changed. Uncontrollably, his whole body suddenly ejected numerous sharp blades. The sharp blades were burning with flames, protecting his whole body like a hedgehog. The next moment, the panic in his eyes was replaced by astonishment. He saw that the closed door in front of him was slowly opening. Something is controlling here? Dean looked at the slowly open door. His pupils contracted slightly. He felt a chill climb up his back, and his hair stood up. The door opened. There was nothing in the aisle behind, but there were a lot of bloodstains and residual hair on the aisle and the walls. Dean's perception quickly extended to the corner at the end. There was wind coming, and the sound of slime sliding became louder. In addition, there was a very low-frequency cooing sound. The sound was very strange, like an unknown language. Dean hesitated for a moment, but finally braced himself and walked in. He thought that if he had been discovered, there was no point in hiding. Since he was here, he might as well see what the hell was inside. Soon, he walked along the corridor and once again came to the spacious space he saw before. The strong smell of rotting corpses came from afar and filled the nearby passages. In this spacious space that looked like a church, there was a giant black tree rooted in the middle. In the middle of the giant tree, there seemed to be something like a bird's nest supporting it. Inside the nest was a snow-white insect that was nearly 3 meters tall. It was chubby, but it had extremely thin and sharp antennae on its body. The branches of the giant black tree extended around, like a giant opening its arms and legs to embrace the world. Under 2 of the thick branches hung 4 or 5 pupae of different sizes. These pupaes' heads were exposed, but their bodies were very tightly wrapped in white silk, and they were oval. These heads belonged to monsters. Some were like lizard heads and some were like leopard heads. The Barker that Dean saw last time was long gone. With various kinds of perception, Dean found that these monsters in the pupae were not dead. Their heads were still breathing. Perhaps this was the reason why only their heads were exposed. Hiss! A familiar sound echoed. Dean turned his head and saw that there were snow-white python-like ice worms drilled out of the holes in the roots of the giant black tree. They raised their heads, but their heads were not triangular like snakes, but oval. There were no eyes or mouth on their heads, but because of this, it brought a stronger fear. 1, 2, 3. Ice worms continued to drill out of the holes. They raised their heads and looked at the intruders. Some of the ice worms' heads were split in the middle, and Dean could see that it was a mouth full of fine and sharp teeth. It seems that no one has been here. Dean saw the situation was the same as last time. His heart was relieved, but he thought about the door that was opened inexplicably. He felt that there was a pair of invisible eyes staring at him in the dark. He didn't dare to relax. He had to deal with the ice worms in front of him first. Very quickly, the extreme ice worms climbed onto the suspended cocoons and crawled into the eyes or nostrils of the demonic creatures. After a short while, these demonic creatures woke up one by one. They opened their eyes and their eyes were filled with killing intent as they shook their bodies. The cocoons broke open and the demonic creatures slid out from within. Along with them was a large amount of water. To be more accurate, it was an unknown mucus. The monster shook its hair out of the mucus and roared at Dean. "There are only 5 of them. It seems that you are not enough." Dean raised his hand and covered his arm with a sharp blade. A 7 or 8 meters long lizard-like monster rushed towards him. It opened its bloody mouth. Dean took the initiative to greet it. Whoosh! His arm passed through the lizard-like monster's mouth. Blood sputtered all the way to its abdomen. It was almost cut into 2 pieces. At this time, the rest of the monsters also rushed towards him. Dean moved his body to avoid the attacks. He counterattacked at the same time. In less than a few minutes, 5 monsters were crippled by Dean. Their heads were cut off, their bodies were cut, and their organs fell out. They couldn't move at all. The strength of these monsters was at the Dominator level. Only one of them was close to the Abyss level. However, it was not enough in front of him. After all, this time he didn't have a powerful carrier like Felicia. 5 ice worms crawled out of the head of the monster and formed a line of defense in front of the giant black tree. To be precise, they were guarding in front of the giant white worm on top of the giant tree. It should be the Ice Worm King since it was protected by so many ice worms. Dean was a little excited, but not too excited. Although the Ice Worm King was the road to the king, but he knew from Burrow that once one became the king, it would be like being possessed by a demon. So even if he got the Ice Worm King, he couldn't give it to Noise and the others. However, it didn't mean that the Ice Worm King was of no value to him. The appearance of an extreme ice insect king would cause a commotion anywhere. Chapter 1038. The confrontation didn't last long. The ice worm didn't know what it meant to be still, so it couldn't hold back and launched an attack first. Dean looked calm and wasn't as flustered as last time. When the ice worm was about to get close, his whole body ignited with blazing flames. His whole body turned into a ball of raging fire. The high temperature instantly dispersed the surrounding cold air, and the metal under his feet quickly heated up. The 7 or 8 ice worms that rushed up saw the burning Dean and immediately stopped moving. They seemed to be stunned for a moment, but soon, their raised heads cracked open their mouths and spat out saliva. The saliva would quickly freeze when it touched something, and it was even more powerful than a freezer. However, when the saliva met with Dean's flame, it quickly melted and white smoke rose. The sun beast that he got from the flame soul worm seemed to be the natural nemesis of the ice worm. Moreover, Dean's physique wasn't weak, so he could fully display the strength of the sun beast. At this moment, when he was attacked by the ice worm's quick freezing saliva, the flame on his body was only slightly weakened, but it didn't affect him much. Seeing this, he calmed down, released the splitting blade, and quickly pounced towards the ice worm. Whoosh! Puff! The burning flame pounced on the ice worm one after another. These ice worms didn't dare to use their bodies to wrap around Dean, so they just kept spitting saliva. Soon, they were approached by Dean one by one, and were quickly dismembered by the splitting blade. They turned into lumps of sticky white meat and fell to the ground, but they were still slowly wriggling. Their tenacious vitality made them almost immortal. However, there was no real immortality. The power of nature was enough to destroy everything. Dean's burning boots stepped on a few lumps of snow-white wriggling meat, and white smoke suddenly rose. The size of the few lumps of white meat quickly shrunk, like melting ice. He estimated that if he continued to burn for a few more minutes, these things would completely disappear. But he didn't do so. He didn't come here to kill these ice worms, but to capture them. As the ice worms were dismembered one after another, Dean walked towards the giant black tree from the ground. His eyes were golden, and his X-ray vision was completely activated. He was on guard against any possibility of changes. The minced meat of the extreme ice insects was slowly reassembling, but it required time. This period of time was enough for him to fight with this thing that he suspected to be the extreme ice insect king. This black giant tree was not a real tree. It had a complex structure inside like a living being, but it did not have a heart, digestive organs, and other organs. However, there was something like blood flowing in its body, and most of this blood flowed into the snow-white giant worm, and then it was extracted from the giant worm's body, cycling back and forth. It's a pity. If you had a human body, you could still communicate with me. I could only use violence to make you listen to me. Dean stood in front of the giant black tree. He felt the branches around him tremble slightly. The roots of the giant tree were also trembling slightly. It seemed that it couldn't bear the high temperature. He expressed sympathy, and then both of his hands turned into cutting blades and shot out. Puff! The sharp blades pierced into the giant black tree. Through long-range touch, Dean's perception extended out of the flame. He could feel a burst of coldness. Suddenly, a shrill scream came from the top of the tree. The scream was extremely high in decibels and pierced the eardrums. Dean's hair stood up and his ear bones shrank. He lowered the sound and looked at the source of the sound. It was coming from the body of the snow-white giant worm. It had woken up. The middle of the snow-white giant worm's body slightly opened, revealing a huge, strange mouth. When the mouth split open, the whole body was divided into two. The degree of opening would make any snake feel ashamed. OM, Guliji! Suddenly, a burst of strange sounds came out of the snow-white giant worm's mouth. Dean was puzzled, but the thing that came out of its mouth made him stunned. Human, please stop. It was the common language of the giant wall, and it was spoken very fluently. It was very magnetic and charming. Human, please stop. At this time, the snow-white giant worm said the same words again, but this time in a different language. It was the English of the old era. Dean was still in a daze. Then the giant worm taught Dean what a language master was. Russian, Spanish, and a small language of a certain country in Africa. 7 or 8 languages were spoken. Dean had never heard of some of them. Finally, it started to talk about the Chinese language. Dean could not help but ask, "What are you?" The snow-white giant worm saw that Dean finally responded. It seemed to be relieved and immediately said in a magnetic Chinese accent, "We don't mean to hurt you here. Please let us go and leave here." Dean could not help but ask, "Why did you say our language? Did you read it from the carrier's memory?" The snow-white giant worm repeated the words above, and the tone did not change. It was like a machine. Dean could not help but repeat his question, but the snow-white giant worm was still repeating his words. He could not help but be annoyed. "What the hell are you? Why did you say our language? If you don't answer me properly, I won't let you have the opportunity to kneel down." His words seemed to have an effect. The snow-white giant insect opened its mouth, as if it was in a daze or trying to organize the meaning of his words. After a while, it said, "Human, in your language, we are called extreme ice insects. We are the ancestors of the parasitic soul insects that you use to increase your strength. We don't mean to offend you. We hope that you can let us go. We are hiding here because we don't want to be found by you." Dean was startled. He squinted his eyes and said, "So, you are the Ice Worm King? You can say that." The snow-white giant worm admitted very simply. Dean was not excited. Instead, he was very calm. He found that this Ice Worm King seemed to be a veteran. It not only knew the languages of the old era, but also the language of the giant wall. It also knew the names that humans gave to them. Just these were enough to show that it had experienced a lot of things, and it was very likely that it had lived from the old era until now. 300 years of lifespan was out of reach for humans, but it might not be a problem for the ice worms that had a tenacious vitality. However, the behavior of the Ice Worm King was a bit strange. It was too honest, and it did not hide anything from it. It was reasonable to say that it knew so many languages of the old era and knew the situation of the giant wall era. It should have been in contact with many humans and learned from them. But since it could get this knowledge, it should have learned the cunning and cautiousness of humans. It should not be so honest. Soon, Dean understood why the Ice Worm King was so honest. Perhaps it intended to let him know that it was the Ice Worm King. With Dean's current strength, the next level was the king level of the abyss. The possibility to continue to become stronger was to absorb the Ice Worm King. Once he had this idea and absorbed it, it was equal to giving it the opportunity to control him. If it was any other abyss, it would be ecstatic, Dean thought in his heart. If it was any other abyss, it would be very happy. Unfortunately, he knew a lot of secrets about the king level from beyond the lookout, so he did not intend to rely on the Ice Worm King to become the king level. Dean felt that he was aware of the Ice Worm King's trick, but he did not immediately kill it. Instead, he said with a bit of joy on his face, "How long have you been hiding here?" The Ice Worm King replied very quickly, "It's been a long time, I can't remember." It was a very vague answer, but also impeccable. Dean smiled. "How do you know our human language?" He was asking the obvious. The Ice Worm King seemed to hesitate for a moment. "I need the blood of other creatures to maintain my life. My children accidentally caught you humans when they were hunting prey, so I learned it from them." It was a very honest answer, but it concealed the specific content. Dean smiled in his heart as if he was watching the prey being caught step by step. "This is your spaceship. Are you from another planet?" Spaceship was the name of the Earth, but Dean believed that it could understand as it could read the human memory. The Ice Worm King answered very quickly, and its tone was also very sincere. "We passed through here, but unexpectedly ran out of energy and fell here. Because of this, we had some wars with you. But please believe that we absolutely did not offend you. We will leave here once we find energy." Dean's heart was a bit shaken when he saw that it admitted that it was an alien creature. As a person of the old era, he was like all the people of the old era. From childhood, he had fantasized about the existence of other life forms in the dark and silent universe. He had also fantasized about the appearance of aliens, thin heads, huge eyes. But he did not expect that the alien life form that finally appeared on Earth would be this huge fat and not cute monster worm in front of him. The reason why it was not cute was because of the slender blades that the latter had retracted to the back of its body and its mouth full of sharp teeth. It made people shudder. At this point, he could finally confirm that the disaster of the old era was caused by the invasion of alien monsters. Although he had some speculations before, and even believed that it was because he had seen some reports on TV before he went into hibernation, but at that time he was still young and hadn't seen the news about the arrival of alien monsters. Later on, he grew up in Sylvia and came into contact with many dark things. He was a bit skeptical about everything. Occasionally he would even think that this thing was secretly created by the old countries with the purpose of reshuffling the power structure of the old era. This kind of fantasy continued until now, and it was finally 100% confirmed. But was the reason for their visit to the Earth really because they were passing by on the way and their energy was exhausted? Dean naturally didn't believe it, but he didn't expose it. After all, he didn't have any reference. Even if he tortured it, he may not get the truth. If the other side insisted on a statement or changed to another wrong statement, then he could only believe it. But now it was different. He could induce it to say things that were half true and half false, and then extract the information that he believed to be true. "Why did you pass through here?" Dean asked. The Extreme Ice Insect King was silent for a while before saying, "Maybe it's because we're too lonely. For millions of years, we've been the only ones on our planet, so we're preparing to search for new life partners in the universe. Originally, we were planning to go to another planet, but we happened to pass by here and discovered you guys. Furthermore, because of the language barrier, a war broke out. This is something we didn't want to happen either." To another planet? It's not a planet but an area. Because we detected that there was a special signal coming from that area. It seems that there is life there, so we went there. So, you didn't land because you ran out of energy, but because you discovered our planet. Dean caught the loophole in its words, but he felt that it deliberately let him catch it. In fact, there are two parts of the reason. We didn't have much energy, so we found you, so we landed. Ice Worm King's tone was a bit awkward, but only its mouth was moving on its smooth body. Dean couldn't see its expression. Dean sneered and pretended to be angry, but there was some doubt in his heart. It mentioned that there was a life signal in another area, but he didn't know whether it was true or false. If it was true, then there were other life in the universe? If it was false, then the original target of these monsters was the Earth. They must have detected the signal that the Earth had projected into the universe, so they specifically came. In the olden era, when humans developed aerospace technology, they never stopped searching for extraterrestrials. Many scientists and famous science fiction writers had mentioned that when humans found extraterrestrials, they might not be able to avoid a disaster. Either humans were weak and oppressed, or they were colonized and ruled by humans, or if they found extraterrestrials weaker than humans, they would be colonized and ruled by humans. No matter what the result was, it was not good for humans and alien races. But humans still didn't stop this fanatical and dangerous action, and always persisted in looking for extraterrestrial creatures. Some people said that it was because humans were too lonely in the vast universe. But if you're lonely, then you're lonely, can you not die? Dean felt that if his guess was true, this ice worm king could simply press the faces of those knowledgeable fanatical intellectuals to the ground and rub them. After thinking for a moment, Dean felt that the second possibility was more likely. These insects were coming for the Earth, otherwise it was impossible for them to sense the existence of life in other star areas, but not the Earth's existence. They came over to start a war, and obviously it was not a good move. Just like the two results, they swallowed humans and ruled the weak. All life had a common characteristic, and that was the need for survival. Humans needed food, beasts needed prey, even a tree needed water to nourish it, which was absorbed from the surrounding environment. Obviously, this was a very cliché fundamental reason. These monsters took a fancy to the Earth's resources and environment. Of course, there was another reason that was less likely, and that was that they were bloodthirsty and liked to kill, so they found the Earth. Chapter 1039. The Ice Worm King was silent. It was like an insect that didn't understand human language. Dean wasn't in a hurry. He just quietly looked at it. His golden pupils could see the internal structure of the Ice Worm King's body. It was white and flawless. It was more beautiful than snow. It was hard to imagine that such a pure and clean body structure would be such an ugly insect. Perhaps it was beautiful, but he couldn't appreciate it. There was only a sticky sound in the silent hall. The surrounding ice worms that were cut into pieces crawled and slowly gathered. One or two of them had recovered most of their bodies and were crawling towards Dean. "Are you trying to stall for time?" Dean opened his mouth. The Ice Worm King seemed to wake up suddenly. No, I'll let them retreat to the side so that they won't die in vain." After that, the ice worms that were crawling towards Dean suddenly stopped. They looked up at the Ice Worm King on the giant black tree. Then they turned their heads and slowly crawled to the dark corner at the edge of the hall. Dean glanced at them but didn't say anything. The confidence in his heart made him feel that these ice worms weren't a threat. Even if all of their bodies were healed, he could still cut them again. It would be effortless. "Origami," the Ice Worm King sighed. It pulled Dean's thoughts back to the Ice Worm King. They are also extraterrestrial creatures. They are the creatures that I mentioned before in the star region that released unknown life signals. They have also found the Earth. However, they are different from us. Their planet is lacking in resources and they are plundering everywhere. They are bloodthirsty and brutal by nature. Moreover, they need to constantly devour other living creatures in order to maintain their own lives. You call them origami. This name was originally given by our race. However, it only has one word, origami. The symbolic meaning of this name is very simple. Wherever the origami passes, there is only barren land. No life can escape from their hands. They won't even let an ant go. However, slowly, they were worshipped as gods by you. Origami, there was a bit of bitterness in the Ice Worm King's voice. Dean was startled. He didn't expect that the situation would turn like this. So, it wasn't lying before? Were they really just passing by the Earth? But how could they explain that they did not notice Earth in advance? His heart was full of doubts, and he could not confirm whether it was true or not. After all, the Ice Insect King said that the origami were bloodthirsty and cruel, and that they devoured other creatures. It reminded him of the origami's flesh that he had seen before, and the situation after he ate the origami's flesh. Indeed, the origami gene had a strong devouring ability. He felt that the reason why his body could absorb the power of other magic marks was most likely because of the origami gene. However, under Crimson Moon's experiments, the berserk nature of this origami gene had been neutralized, so it did not pose much of a threat to him. However, he still did not dare to remove the uranium ring. He needed further experiments to confirm it. So, the war with the humans were all origami? Dean asked deliberately. The Ice Worm King said, not all of them. Back then, the main enemy of you humans was us. These origami were just hiding in the dark, intensifying the conflict between us and the humans. Although they were cruel and bloodthirsty, their IQ was very high, and they were extremely cunning. They instigated us to start a war with you humans, and then they reaped the benefit. Unfortunately, no one saw this at that time. Until the end, when they showed up, everything was revealed, but it was too late. At that time, the humans were already ready to perish together with us, and they launched the strongest world-destroying plan. Dean was stunned. First, he did not expect it to admit that it was the enemy of the humans. Second, he was suddenly not sure whether what it said was true or false. Dean's mind stopped for a moment, and he suddenly reacted. He was secretly shocked. No matter if what the Ice Worm King said was true or false, it could already shake his mind. This was not something that could be moved by a simple honesty. So, you and our ancestors were fooled. Then why did the giant wall and the empire appear in the end, and why do we call them origami? Dean asked thoughtfully. The Ice Worm King was silent for a moment and slowly said, I don't know why the giant wall appeared. At that time, the humans launched the world-destroying plan, and we had to temporarily avoid it. I have been here for a very long time, and I have never left, and I can't leave. The situation outside that I know is from the human explorers who came here one after another, and I caught them. I searched the memory fragments. I only know the current appearance of the world, but I don't know the history in the middle. But my guess is that origami used despicable means to cover up its crimes, and instead threw all the crimes to our clan. Then, in the name of helping the humans, they ruled the humans, but in fact they were just raising humans. After all, their clan likes to kill and devour, but if all the creatures are plundered, they will also perish. So raising humans is the best way. You humans have excellent reproductive ability, and if you control the killing, you can use it for many years. Dean frowned. Was it really like this? He couldn't distinguish it. The Ice Worm King's words were methodical, and he couldn't find fault with it. The only thing he could guess and confirm was that it should be hiding some other things. But the main thing that it said had no loopholes, and the possibility was extremely high. Even if it didn't say it, Dean may speculate like this. Raising, killing. Dean thought of the towering giant wall, and his heart suddenly burst into a burst of cold. This giant wall that was thousands of meters high was obviously not the work of humans. Did they build such a giant wall just to shelter humans? He suddenly thought of the pigs, dogs, cows and sheep raised by humans, and his face couldn't help but slightly change. Humans used guardrails to raise pigs and sheep, but wasn't it to protect them? They were worried that they would run outside and be caught and slaughtered by others? But if they continued to stay in the guardrails, sooner or later they would be slaughtered by the masters who sheltered them. Was the ultimate fate of the residents inside the giant wall like this? Dean thought about it and felt that it was not right. He had been the master of the Sylvia Wall for many years, but he had never heard of unknown forces or characters that captured or slaughtered a large number of people. Occasionally, there would be large-scale casualties because of the improper disposal of the bodies of the refugees, and the piling up of the corpses of rats in the streets, which caused plague and other disasters. If it is hidden, No, I have read the secret files, and they are the most confidential things inside the giant wall. It is impossible that there is no record in the files, unless the master of the wall and the origami are from the same nest. Dean frowned, and suddenly he thought that he had overlooked one thing. The origami are dead, so they died after building the giant wall, so they didn't have the time to carry out the plan? But soon this idea was overturned by him. He felt that the origami shouldn't be extinct from this world. After all, as the last big winner, the origami, how could they be extinct? If the origami existed, and raising humans was their purpose, then the event of human being slaughtered would inevitably be recorded. Don't ignore some of the great people who survived the dogma and justice, and their beliefs were beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Whether it was a great person or a sinner, when they reached a certain height, the firm belief they had to pay was the same. Dean raised the doubts in his heart to the Ice Worm King to see its reaction and answer. I don't know, maybe it happened, but you don't know, after all they did it, they wouldn't be so blatant and cause panic. Humans can unscrupulously pick a lamb from the flock and slaughter it. They don't care about the thoughts of other sheep, because humans think that these sheep have no intelligence, but you humans obviously know the fear of intelligent life, so they won't do that. The Ice Worm King thought for a moment and said, It is also possible that they said that they picked from different giant wall, so they wouldn't gather in one giant wall to harvest. Wouldn't harvest in one giant wall. Dean's eyes flashed. Was it because Sylvia was too weak, so such activities were only carried out in the Empire? After thinking for a moment, he felt that he couldn't distinguish the truth from the lies, so he temporarily put down the matter. He couldn't continue to be led by the nose by the Ice Worm King in front of him. So, I can also inquire about the things that you know. In that case, it seems that you have no value. The Ice Worm King didn't seem to expect that Dean would suddenly turn against him, but soon it anxiously said, Everything I said to you is true, I didn't hide anything from you, but I really don't know about other things. How about this, I tell you the way to continue to become stronger, and give you my children, they will unconditionally accept you. Dean slightly sneered. Even if they resist, do they have the ability? This. The Ice Worm King was a little disappointed. What do you want? I don't want anything. You and your children belong to me. Dean's eyes flashed, and the corner of his mouth revealed a smile. You seem to have forgotten that I'm the Abyss. The way for a human to become the Abyss is to eat your children to further strengthen their physique. But it's not enough to rely on your children. If I can eat you, I should be able to reach the peak of the human race. The Ice Worm King angrily said, You said that you won't hurt me. How come I don't remember? Dean sneered. You can resist or obey, it's up to you. But it's better to persuade you to be obedient, so that you won't suffer. If you perform well, I may leave one for your children, and it won't be considered as exterminating you. The Ice Worm King was so angry that he screamed. For a time, the languages of different countries and different races burst out. Dean quietly listened to the scene, and even had some amazement and appreciation. He had never heard the scene of multi-language cursing. Moreover, he had never seen the acting skills of an insect that could soar to such a high level. Unfortunately, the old era was broken, and there was no way to receive the Oscar. After cursing for a few minutes, the Ice Worm King gradually managed his own language system, and angrily said to Dean in Chinese, You bastard, you humans are despicable, shameless, greedy, selfish race. You deserve to be imprisoned by Huang, and you deserve to recognize the thief as your father. It's recognizing the thief as God. Dean corrected. This also implied that he believed what it said earlier. The Ice Worm King angrily scolded. Despicable, shameless. Chinese is broad and profound, and it's the highest language on our side, but you have only learned a few curse words, it's really. Dean shook his head, indicating that the child could not be taught. The Ice Worm King was stunned. Apparently, he found that compared with the purebred earthlings, He was a few streets behind in terms of cursing. You have to keep your word this time. The Ice Worm King seemed to be gnashing his teeth as he said, Of course, I don't need your child when I reach the bottleneck anyway, Dean said as if it was a matter of course. The Ice Worm King was silent for a long time, and finally agreed. Dean was also relieved. He felt that he should also get an Oscar. Oh no, one might not be enough, he should get a dozen. By the way, why was the door of the spaceship closed when I came in? It didn't seem like this the last time I came. Dean thought of the previous strange opening of the door, and immediately asked. The Extreme Ice Insect King said weakly, The spaceship has recovered some of its energy, so I asked my child to close it. I wanted to rest and recuperate in peace, but who knew? At this point, it seemed to have suddenly realized something. 2 black eyeballs protruded out of its snow-white fat body. They were the size of soybeans and were very hidden. How did you open the door? It opened by itself. Dean frowned. Tell me honestly, is there anything else here? The Ice Worm King seemed to be jumping, and its voice suddenly increased by octave. The door opened by itself? How is it possible? My children are here, and without my permission, they can't open the door. Dean looked at it, and suddenly wasn't sure whether it was acting this time, but it seemed to be a bit real. Was it really not opened by it? Or, was there something hidden here that it didn't know about? If it was, then that thing opened the door and used him to come over. Thinking of this, Dean's whole body hair stood up, and he vigilantly looked at the darkness around him. The door opened by itself. If you are hiding, then don't blame me for being angry. If you are not hiding, then it is estimated that there is something you don't know about here. Moreover, it can control this spaceship. The Ice Worm King wanted to say that Dean had just turned hostile, so what was so strange about it? However, Dean's words made it nervous all of a sudden. Its black eyeballs quickly turned, and it looked around. It knew that Dean didn't seem to be lying, and there was no reason for him to deliberately say so. If the door really opened by itself, then it was really King Hell. In the quiet and dark hall, Dean could only hear the sound of his own breathing. He tried to expand his perception to the extreme, and wanted to sense the surroundings, but many passages couldn't be explored, and the range of perception was limited. Within his perception range, there was nothing. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.